Can I thank the witnesses for their attendance this morning? Mr. Hinton, welcome back. You brought some colleagues with you this morning. Can I invite you, just for the benefit of those who are following our proceedings and our own official record, to introduce yourselves to the committee?
Yeah, so I'm David Hinton, CEO of South East Water.
Chris Train, Chair of South East Water.
I'm Caroline Sheridan. I'm an independent non-executive director at South East Water.
Okay. As you know, we've heard from David already. Chris, Caroline, you are non-executive directors. Just for the benefit of the committee, can you give me, I'll maybe start with you, Chris, your understanding of the role and the function of the non-exec director in a company such as this?
The role of the board is to have oversight of the organisation and deliver good governance for the organisation. And in doing that, we challenge the executive team in a constructive manner in order to ensure that the right thought processes and the right assessments are taking place in the organisation in order to be able to develop and support any developments of the organisation. So our role is to independently challenge the actions on behalf of the customers of South East Water, but also the shareholders.
Mm-hmm. So where you see shortcomings, you see it as being part of your role to hold the executive team to account, is that?
Absolutely, that is the role and function of the board. Okay.
Caroline, do you have anything you would want to add to that?
Well, I think I would add the experience that the board bring to a company. And I think that is very helpful to give different perspective, and certainly when we're able to provide challenge to issues and events that may occur. And I think that really does help with the long-term strategic approach for the company as a whole.
Okay, so the board of South East Water has how many non-execs and how many executive directors?
So we have on the board two non-execs, two execs, three non-execs, myself as the independent chair, and two shareholder reps who represent the shareholders. And so that gives that balance of experience that Caroline was just talking about. So
as well as being customer facing, you have a responsibility to ensure that the shareholder interests are properly protected.
Absolutely. We have to take into account that balance of the delivery to customers and the overall long and short term operation of the business.
Okay. David, last time you were here, we spoke about the outage at Tunbridge Wells at the end of November into the early part of December. Let's just say the door had hardly swung shut behind you last time, but there was another outage of some significance in the same area following Storm Goretti. How would you characterise your response to that outage?
It was very, as you say, very soon after. The Tunbridge Wells area hadn't fully recovered, which meant the Tunbridge Wells area was disproportionately affected again, and for which I really apologise for that. Those two events effectively joined up from a Tunbridge Wells point of view. In terms of how I'd categorise it, it was very different to the Pembrey event. The Pembrey event, as we discussed last time, was an issue with water quality which prevented the treatment works from actually producing the required drinking water to meet demand. The event that occurred in Sussex and Kent was, as you say, part of the impact was Goretti. We had effectively a freeze-thaw event prior to Goretti, and that increased the demand on the system. And then Goretti effectively, by its nature, power impacts as well as decreasing raw water quality meant our supply was reduced. So it effectively made an imbalance between supply and demand.
My question was, how do you characterise your response?
We'd learnt something from the previous one. It was obviously very soon after. We responded with all the resources available to us, utilising a lot of resources we put in recently, the 12 tankers that we've recently purchased, new contracts to help deliver priority service register water deliveries to customers, set up a 1.88 bottle water station, so more than we needed to during the Tunbridge Wells event. So we put all of our effort into ensuring that we had as much as we could on the ground to support those customers.
Mm-hmm. Well, you see, you'll recall last time we discussed the input of the local Member of Parliament in Tunbridge Wells, Mike Martin. We've received correspondence from Katie Lamb, whose constituents were affected. Can I just share with you what she said? South East Water was unable to answer even the most basic factual questions, such as, is there actually any bottled water at this bottled water station? Members of her team repeatedly had to drive to the station themselves to establish the facts. She had people contact her who were registered as vulnerable and still unable to access water. Some had newborn babies. There was no number for her to call to help them. South East Water could take days to respond to their supposedly instantaneous email address. They simply had no idea what was going on. Doesn't sound that different from the November-December outage.
We did learn some lessons. Clearly, we've got more to learn. We've put in the short-term resilience plan, which picks up a number of lessons from both events, which were pretty much concurrent. And we've also got a transformation programme we're putting in place for the business to ensure that we pick up all the lessons from these different events, both in terms of engineering side, but also in terms of response. And I'm really disappointed to hear that customers had that experience. One of the things we put in place,
Sorry, are you hearing this for the first time?
No, I'm not hearing it for the first time, but I'm just recognising that we hate it when customers, particularly priority service registered, but any customers, do not receive that alternative water. And that is one of our key focuses. We delivered nearly 35,000 deliveries to vulnerable customers during the January event. Mm-hmm. And I hate it when we miss any. And to hear that it upsets me, and we need to do better.
Mm-hmm. Your response to the first outage was to tell us that you had commissioned your own independent report, which was prepared by Caroline. What do we find that's new in that report that wasn't in the Drinking Water Inspectorate report?
There's a great deal of consistency actually between the two reports. Mm-hmm. And I would categorise it.
You effectively, your independent report found the same things as the Drinking Water Inspectorate.
Largely, yeah.
If I told you, David, that the committee felt that the Drinking Water Inspectorate gave a very different picture to the committee than that which had been given by you in their evidence, would that be fair comment?
Are you regarding the first hearing?
Yes.
We differed on one element, I think. We differed on the element of foreseeability of the event. I didn't really give, as I recall from the notes, any other factual information around the water quality event that differed from the Drinking Water Inspectorate's one. I think the large disagreement area was one on foreseeability.
Mm-hmm. And they said that not only was it foreseeable, but they had foreseen it and they'd warned you about it, didn't they?
I believe that's what they said, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Any understanding now of why you didn't act on that warning?
So, the foreseeability question, how I answered it was largely predicated on sort of two pieces of information. One is the stability of the plant over many decades running the same way. And the other one was the belief that the raw water quality had changed significantly at the point that the treatment work started to struggle. Both the independent report and the DWI report, which
the DWI report would be characterised as independent, would it not?
Yeah, it would. Both independent reports have effectively.
We'll come to that later.
Have effectively came up with the same set of conclusions, which I would categorise as there were definitely early warnings at the treatment works that the treatment was not performing as it should. Mm-hmm. We should have reacted on those earlier warnings quicker, and our problem solving around it when we got into that situation was too slow. And and unstructured. So the problem solving and the reaction is in my belief, and the timing and the early reaction, both reports agree on as a failing on the Pembury treatment works on that particular week.
Are you still blaming climate change?
No, I'm not blaming climate change. At the time...
You did, and Chris, you did in your correspondence back to me following that session.
It's an element factor, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. The speed and severity of climate change in the South East in particular has outstripped reasonable predictions. Would that still be your assessment today?
I think that still would be the assessment.
You hold to that assessment?
The thing that the independent report couldn't, or the DWI report couldn't verify, was what the state of the water quality in the Pembury Pond was at that point in time. It was our belief at that time, and still is our belief, that that was affected by climate change and the drought that was experienced last summer, and therefore the water levels within that pond.
Because in fact, Ofwat were warning the whole industry as far back as 2008 about the impact of climate change, were they not?
Yeah, and climate change has been a factor in our planning. And we use, traditionally we use government climate change forecasts, particularly when assessing the impact on potential changes to raw water quality, but also in changes on demand and available water. It's fair to say, though, I think the predictions have been outstripped by the actual weather, particularly the extreme weather events and the number of extreme weather events we've experienced over the last few years. I think we've broken the hottest day, the warmest spring, the driest summer. It goes on in a period of about 3 years. So
and this is unique to West Kent, is it?
The factor that makes that a double impact is it's not unique to West Kent, but the southeast of England does experience particularly the hotter summer impact more than the rest of the country. And the unique factor at South East Water is our headroom, our gap between supply and demand is much closer than any other company. Other companies have it in pockets. We have it over Sussex and Kent largely. As you know, we also manage an area that's Surrey and Hampshire, which has larger headroom. And if that was still a company on its own right, that would be the best or second best performing company on infrastructure. So the difference between the two regions is largely the headroom that exists between supply and demand.
What about your root cause analysis of the difficulties? You've heard what Ofwat have to say about that, I understand. What response would you give to Ofwat's analysis of your root cause analysis?
So our root cause analysis is a combination of things, but the fundamental thing for us is that our supply-demand balance is really tight. Now that shouldn't be seen as an excuse. We should monitor and control our assets better in that scenario, and we fully take accountability of that when it doesn't happen.
I mean, Ofwat say that you fundamentally misunderstand the nature and purpose of root cause analysis, and in fact at one point in the course of the investigation you sought clarification on what root cause analysis actually meant.
That inquiry was so that both parties were of a joint understanding of how root cause analysis should be done in this particular case. Root cause analysis has a number of different methodologies. We were trying to establish a methodology that we could both agree on so the findings can be agreed once we followed that route.
Having agreed that, they concluded that you fundamentally misunderstood the nature and purpose of root cause analysis. That you're identifying extreme weather, high demand, leakage as causes. They conclude that these are triggers or immediate causes. Does it concern you that Ofwat reaches that conclusion?
Of course, and we are in the process still with Ofwat, and we're further discussing that. We've put a lot of information into Ofwat about what we believe the root cause analysis. I don't think it's a single thing. I think that's where some of the difficulty between the parties is arising. But we will continue to discuss this with Ofwat as this process progresses.
I mean, the Ofwat work is pretty fundamental. They're saying that extreme weather is a known risk and that you should be prepared for cold weather in January. It's not an unreasonable position to take, but obviously you're not.
We have, so since 2020, when we started to genuinely see the climate change impacting the system. In 2018, there was an industry-wide beach in the east, but prior to that, there was not really any single event that caused any impact to South East Water. We started to see them from 2020, and we've worked through the learnings of those. Our ability to deal with an event is far in excess of what it used to be. The resources we have available to us, we have still fallen short. We have still let our customers down when those events do happen. But we have learned a lot, and we've got more to learn. But we have put some considerable resource into it. I've increased the operational resource available to, in other words, the operations teams by over 20% in the last 3 years. And that's allowed us to be able to respond. We still have got more to do.
You've let your customers down. What are you going to do to make up to that?
We are going to. So we have been, as a business, focused on absolutely getting the infrastructure procured through the regulatory process to allow us to provide future resilience to our customers in the presence of climate change, in the presence of housing growth. And we now have that. That process is now finished. So we are knuckling down to deliver that infrastructure. That's what effectively will deliver the resilience and secure the supplies for the customers.
Okay, the question was about what you're doing to compensate your customers.
When the events occur, we compensate them using the GSS payment system for both business and household customers.
And the actual losses incurred by businesses?
We've opened a fund. We've opened it last week.
How big is that fund?
We've initially put aside £600,000 for that fund.
Mm-hmm. If I told you that Mike Martin MP has written to the committee again, telling us that he's conducted his own survey. I don't think he's pretending that this is scientific, but he's had 100 businesses respond with a loss totalling something in the region of 1.2 million. 600,000 isn't going to touch the sides, is it?
Well, we'll run the process. Businesses can apply. It closes on the end of May, and then we'll assess those cases as they come in, and then we will have a basis on which to make that judgment. So
do you anticipate that you would compensate anybody who can demonstrate a loss?
We will run the process and we'll see how that process...
No, but the purpose of the process, let's look at the outcome. Is the purpose of the outcome to compensate any business that sustained a loss?
We will look at sustaining a loss, insurability and a number of other factors when we pay the claim. We put aside £600,000 to do that, and we'll do it on a case-by-case basis.
From that, I understand that if you take the view that somebody should have insured against the risk of your company's poor performance, then you wouldn't expect to pay them compensation?
I'm not fully up to speed with the rules of the scheme, but what I would say is...
But it's not about the rules of the scheme, Mr Hinton, it's about what you intend to do as a company. We
will not make a judgment on whether they should have insured. We will just take into account whether they have been insured.
Right. The last time you were here, you gave yourself 8 out of 10 for your response to the outage at the end of November, January. How would you mark yourself out of 10 for the subsequent outage?
So if I can slightly rewind, so I gave 8 out of 10 for the response, and in my mind when I gave that answer, I was thinking about what the teams had done to procure the extra resource, arrange the extra contracts, work on the bottled water stations, deliver in all sorts of weather, and the effort that the teams had put in behind. That was what was in my mind when I gave it 8 out of 10.
All of which has to do with South East Water, very little to do with customer outcome, if I may say so.
And that is absolutely right. But a number of factors were in my mind when you asked me to score, and for that reason, it's really, really hard to score. And so I don't intend to score it again, if that's okay, Chair. It's so complicated. There's, as you pointed out, there's staff, there's customers, there's a number of different impacts that needs to be considered.
Give me a word then if it's not an 8 out of 10.
Sorry?
Give me a word. Good, bad, indifferent?
Disappointing.
Disappointing. Disappointing suggests it's against a framework of expectation.
My expectation is that we deliver to all priority service customers and that the bottled water stations are completely resourced the whole time and customers can get access to alternative water at all times. So whenever we do not meet that particular yardstick, then I'm disappointed.
Yes, you're the non-exec chairman. What mark would you give the company for its response to the 2 outages?
I don't think it's appropriate. This is complex. We failed on the basic objective of delivering water to customers. And therefore that is a failure, and we recognise that failure.
You've been told by somebody preparing you not to answer this question.
No, this is what I feel is the right answer to the question. That we failed our customers. We worked very hard to rectify that situation, and since the events and the independent reviews, we have undertaken a lot of actions to improve the resilience and the operations.
The purpose of asking you to give a mark is so that your customers have an understanding of how you see your performance on a scale. That's why we ask for a figure like this.
Yeah.
You've told us already that it's part of your responsibility as a non-exec director to look to customer interests. Do you not think your customers deserve that degree of accountability from you?
And that degree of accountability is that we accept that we failed in our primary duty, and we could have done better with all of the factors, and that's one of the
If I'm a customer in Tunbridge Wells, what does that tell me? I think we know that you've failed. It's surely important to them that you understand and you're prepared to explain the extent of the failure, and apparently you're not.
Failure is failure, and we have failed, and what's important is that we as an organisation learn from that in order that we don't fail at any point in the future. It is not right that it is absolutely untenable for customers to be without water, and whatever we do on alternative water, however good we are at alternative water, that does not substitute from a customer's perspective not being able to...
Well, as the non-exec director, then why do you reward failure within the company?
Sorry?
As the non-executive director, why do you reward failure within the company? We
don't reward failure.
Remind me of Mr. Hinton's salary increase and bonus.
So David's salary...
I mean, a £400,000 bonus, is that correct?
No, that's incorrect.
No. Sorry, well, tell me what the figures are then.
So David's salary is subject to the remuneration committee of the board.
Yeah, we know that. Other non-exec directors.
Yeah.
What's the salary?
And the salary is 400,000.
Right. And the performance payment on top of that?
And the performance payment for this year, we have not finalised, but Dave has indicated that he is not prepared to take a bonus this year.
You were prepared to give him one?
No, David...
I mean, this isn't an event that's just happened. There's been a history of systemic failing within this company since 2018 onwards, has there not?
There have been a number of failures in the organisation.
And in that time, salaries have gone up and bonuses have increased.
As I say, the REMCO, Remuneration Committee, benchmarks the salaries of the executives in order that we make sure that we are getting the best balance of quality of executive for the organisation.
Any that fails its customers and presumably also its shareholders as a consequence.
We are disappointed. Dave has surrendered his bonus, even if we were going to give. As a remuneration committee, that made the conversation probably a lot easier than it might have been otherwise. But Dave recognises that, the board recognises that within the Remuneration Committee also.
What effective difference do you make as non-executive directors here? Either of you?
So we make a big difference, I think, and the organisation...
How bad would it be without you then?
Pardon?
How bad would it be without you if you're making a big difference?
This is governance is an important part of running an organisation, and the experience and quality and challenge that the board and the non-executive directors bring to the executive team is very valuable in running a good company. We have failed in a number of areas in terms of there are opportunities for us to learn and develop. One of the points made within the independent report is around the management of risk and the balance of risk. We have a pretty typical risk management system, that framework that we use of parent risks, child risks within the organisation. What I think we could improve on is that level of balance of the operational risk and the operational decision making within.
Well, I mean, your government has been criticised by the Secretary of State. Sorry, your company's been criticised by the Secretary of State, Prime Minister, a whole range of different public and private bodies. Your own shareholders have expressed concerns, but you're still content that you do a good job and you should remain there.
I think that's a slight misrepresentation. You know, we are concerned. It is not a good position to...
NatWest Pension Fund said that in their 25% owners that they were extremely concerned by the impact on customers and said they would use their influence to direct South East Water's board to ensure these issues are fully resolved. Did they direct you in that way?
They did, and that's an absolutely appropriate statement. As a shareholder, you are concerned around the performance of the organisation, and it is really important that we learn the lessons. As Dave said, there was no one individual cause of the event, but there are a number of failures and weaknesses in the process that we need to make sure are rectified across the piece. As a board, we have put a lot of focus on both the short-term measures and the long-term measures that will improve the resilience, particularly around Tunbridge Wells.
I've taken long enough on this. I don't think we're going to make any further progress. But Jenny, you've got a point to come in on.
Thank you, Chair. Just one quick question. Chris, you said earlier you failed customers, you failed in your primary duty, we failed a number of areas, and there are opportunities for us to learn and develop. As the Chair just said, how bad would things have to get for a change in leadership at the very top?
So it is really important for the board to have good leadership in the organisation, and we have looked, as you would expect us to do, at what the appropriate leadership of the organisation is going forward. The board has given its commitment and its backing to Dave and the executive team going forward as the right solution for delivering what is best for South East Water customers. Alongside that, we recognise that there are a number of forward-looking challenges, and we're bolstering the executive team with a number of external hires, which will cover a broader spectrum of leadership across the organisation.
When we were last here, we were examining an issue in November, and we called you back. We're examining an issue in January. If we call you back for a third issue in the spring, will this leadership team still be here, and will we be scrutinising the same leadership team, or will it be a new face?
That's not an appropriate question to answer because it depends upon the circumstances. The board is backing Dave as chief executive and the executive team.
Sorry, Chair, I feel like we're wading through treacle here. We're not really getting... You haven't answered my colleague's original question, which is what would it take for a change in leadership? You've had an outage that affected tens of thousands of people, another outage that affected tens of thousands of people, a proposed fine because 286,000 customers have been failed according to Ofwat. The Chair has pointed out the Prime Minister feels that what's happened is unacceptable. What more has to happen for Mr Hinton's position to be untenable?
And the reason for not asking the question, I don't think it's appropriate to hypothesise. What is important is learning what has caused the events and making the appropriate changes within the organisation to deliver against those. The board are backing the executive team to deliver against that. And that's not without its challenges, without a doubt, but we are backing the executive team.
Part of remedying what's happened is people having confidence.
Yeah.
And your customers clearly don't have confidence, as has been expressed by the leader of Kent County Council, 7 local members of Parliament. This committee has made its concerns very, very clear. Why isn't the confidence of your customers not an important part of you turning this around?
Confidence is a hugely important part, and we do need to rebuild confidence within our customer base, that we are doing the right things and that we are delivering against the requirements of our customers. And we believe that is best served by Dave and the team delivering.
Yeah.
As you said, this is a failure of your basic objectives, and it's failure after failure, excuse after excuse. The board is not doing its job. It's not delivering on governance, it's not delivering on accountability, and as my colleague Tim just said, you've lost the faith of your customers, and the only way to rebuild that faith is to take action to change leadership. Why did you not see that is a very basic part of this? Any other company that has failed on its basic objectives, that has, mistake after mistake from 2018 onwards, a failure to react and implement recommendations one time after another, and yet here we are. I'm just frankly flabbergasted that nobody is accountable for the mess that the company's in.
We are accountable for where we are. We, as a board, we have to step back and ask the questions that you're asking. We have to look at the broad context of the organisation. We have to look at the context of the industry and the sector, and we have to do what we think is best in the best interests of South East Water customers.
You might be asking the right questions, but I think you're coming up with the wrong answers.
Yeah. Okay. I can see we're not going to shift this, so I think we'll move on. Julia, do you have some questions around the foreseeability of the issues at Pembury?
Thank you, Chair. So you and the DWI disagree on how far in advance the issues at Pembury could have been foreseen. You claim that between the 1st and the 15th of November, the treatment works were operating normally. But the DWI states that there have been clear signals from as early as the 9th of November. Do you think that the DWI is wrong?
No. I've gone over the information both from the independent investigation and DWI's independent investigation, and there are signals in the early parts of November that we should have reacted to. We should have done more in the early part of the period. We should have then used different problem-solving skills, used more advanced problem-solving skills, and remedied the situation quicker, and that would not have impacted customers. So both reports conclude around that same issue. It was the reaction to what was appearing to be a treatment works that was going out of control, that we were too slow on that. And I agree, that is what happened at Pembury.
Okay. So the DWI identified problems with coagulant dosing assets at Pembury over 10 years ago. It says it doesn't understand why you've not installed more modern systems. Could you tell us as a committee why?
So the system, without getting too technical, but the system at Pembury has it changes the coagulant with the flow rate. There are more advanced systems available. Pembrey is due to be upgraded in 2028. When you change something like a coagulant system, quite often you need to change the control philosophy of the site, and that was very much planned as part of that upgrade. What we should have recognised in the interim, while we were waiting for that upgrade, is that we should have been monitoring it more often and harder and more appropriately in the space between where we were and the upgrade itself. It's absolutely intended to upgrade Pembrey when we upgrade the plant as a whole up to a more modern coagulation system.
And have you got a time frame of when you're...
We're starting it in 2028. It will take a number of years to do the whole plant because it is the sole treatment process for Tunbridge Wells, so it can't be taken offline. We need to do it while it's live. So it'll be a long project, but coagulation will be very early in that process.
And so really my question is, it's 10 years ago it was identified, needed updating. But
And like I say, it's not an outlier in being just a flow-controlled coagulation, but there are more modern equivalents available. And no, like I say, without putting that in, we should have monitored it more as an alternative, and we didn't do that.
So my final question to you is, the argument about raw water quality changes was central to your assertion in January that this incident was not foreseeable and it was not preventable. Did you mislead the committee?
That is what I thought at the time. The evidence I had at the time was that the things that's... When we have a treatment work failure or anything actually, we look to see what has changed because the plant was running in a certain way and something changed. The raw water quality did change, but it didn't become exceptional. I accept that now. At the time, I thought it was exceptional. I accept that now that it wasn't exceptional, and there was a number of other causes as highlighted by the DWI and the independent report that contributed to that. So I gave the full evidence as I understood it to be at the time. More evidence has come to light, and so I absolutely agree that that position, given that information, was foreseeable.
And so in the future, will you be taking different actions?
Absolutely. We've already taken a number of actions at Pembrey, a number of actions across the whole treatment works in terms of the process. We've installed the 2 filters that we discussed at the previous hearing. We've changed some of the washing philosophies on the filters. We've added more monitors into the system, and we've overall increased the jar testing. We've done a complete overhaul of the risks we face at Pembrey to take us to the point where we can do the full refurb of the plant.
These are things that the Drinking Water Inspector has been telling you for some time to do, are they not?
Yeah. We have the DWI audited us earlier in the year, and we agreed a set of commitments with the DWI at that time, and we are on course to deliver those by the dates that we collectively agreed with each other during that process.
The difficulty I have with this, David, is that last time you told us you couldn't talk to your customers at the time because you were leading from the front operationally. Leading from the front operationally, you still didn't know at the beginning of January that these failings were there.
So, as I said before, what I meant by that was there was an event that I was running. I was running an event that was impacting the Tunbridge Wells area pre-Christmas. And it was a complicated, as you'll recall, we talked about this for some time. It was a complicated water quality event, and I felt I could add some expertise to that, so I did go to site.
This is fundamental stuff, and it's fundamental stuff that you've been warned about by regulators. So you would surely have been looking for it, were you not? When still you're telling us you didn't see it.
We didn't see this particular issue, and we should have seen it. And like I said, the DWI and South East Water have agreed a set of undertakings that we're on course to deliver. We're accelerating those, as you might imagine, and we've done a lot more than was in that, effectively, in that set of undertakings with DWI already, including the 2 filters.
Okay, and Chris, you've discussed this internally, have you? Are you satisfied with this as a non-exec?
I mean, more than discussing it internally, we've been down to the Pembrey Works. We've had a look at the facility, and we had a look at the challenges that there are and the work that has been done in order to improve the resilience of the site. And clearly one of the big things that will help to improve resilience of supplies to Tunbridge Wells is the investment in Buell, which I'm very pleased to say that the Competition and Market Authority in their assessment have essentially funded an extra 100 million in resilience.
You see, you've been down. How often do you go down to Pembury?
So Pembury Works, I have been down to on one occasion.
This is your single treatment, or? And you hadn't visited it before this?
This is one of 88 treatment works that South East Water run.
Tunbridge Wells, though, it's a single point, is it not?
It's not the only single point on the system. And this is one of the challenges that South East Water faces, is that, and it's why we're very supportive of the government's white paper on setting resilience standards for the water sector, because without that, your ability to invest in resilience is somewhat limited.
Right. But given all the previous warnings and the history of this plant, you've only visited it once. You've been a non-exec director since 22? 22, and chairman since then as well? Okay. Right, we're going to move on now to questions around monitoring, maintenance and culture. Henry, you're going to lead our questioning.
Thank you, Chair. If I just sort of start with the maintenance and monitoring, I think, Mr. Hinton, you talked about, you gave an answer to my colleague just now about the need for more advanced problem solving. But I think what's striking when you look at the DWI report is about the basics, routine maintenance. So they set out that that was just not being undertaken. I think 7 of 13 scheduled site visits relating to the DAF stage, which is the dissolved air flotation and filtration stage, were not started or completed between the 9th of November and the 25th of November. And filters not being washed adequately in the months before the incident. So you're not doing the basics, are you?
I think that was one of the root causes identified by both the two different investigations.
Well, you say hold on a second, because you say that, but yes, in the report that you talk about gaps in operation. I mean, this is not just a gap. You're not doing over half of what you're meant to be doing.
So the maintenance that you're talking about is a routine daily maintenance that the individual technicians on site perform. That will never be totally 100% because they react to what's happening on the plant as well, and they will judge on that risk assessment. Now, 7 out of 13 is not good enough. What this has shown to us as an executive team is that the teams are too reactive, and they're not spending enough time on the routine task. That the area, particularly in the Kent and Sussex area, and particularly in the Kent area, is an area that needs to have all of the treatment works running at all times. It is a very tight supply-demand balance, and that has generated a reactive culture that we really, really need to resolve. This is not the choice of the individuals, it's the pressure that we put on it. So that's one of the reasons we've increased the operational staff by 100 people. That's one of the reasons we put in a planned maintenance team that's dedicated to doing the planned maintenance so the operators can operate. These aren't things I've put in since November, these have been in for a while. It's a key part of the transformation programme that we've launched going forward, is to refocus our teams which have been under pressure, ensuring that all plants were running at all time to meet the supply-demand balance, which is really tight in the area. And like I said before, the investment is the long-term solution to that, but in the interim we need to get better at this, and 7 out of 13 is not good enough. And that's why those changes are already in. We really need to get them deeply embedded to ensure that what we're doing on the plant ensures that the plant we have got is running at all times. We've got the second best outage record in the industry. In other words, our works run more than anyone else. in terms of percentage of the time they need to run. And but that focus has meant, in my view, that we need to restore some of the resource available to do some of the more basic tasks on a daily basis. And that's, like I say, why we've made those changes already. We made those changes 18 months ago, and we're recruiting into those roles.
I suppose part of understanding what maintenance needs to be done is that you have to monitor what's happening in the first place. And the DWI also set out that there wasn't enough monitoring going on at the Pembury works, particularly around optimising that coagulation process. So there's no continuous temperature monitoring, and the critical treatment parameters not being monitored. So that's raw water conductivity, coagulant flow, aluminium concentrations. Effectively, I think it was said to the committee after the evidence you gave in January by Marcus Rink that you were flying blind in the lead up to the event. Do you accept that you were flying blind?
I accept that we weren't recording absolutely what we should have been recording. We were reliant on the fact that the works had run stable for so long, that with the parameters we were measuring, that we didn't think about the risk enough. Risk has been a big learning from both the independent review and the DWI review. We don't, in my view, and what one of the big parts of the transformation is to have risk embedded right down to a site level. So we have complete visibility throughout the business. The water industry historically manages risk at a site level. It allows the operators to manage the risk. And that visibility, we want more of. So we are deeply embedding risk right across the organisation, so we can see when these issues begin, when we can start, when issues around maintenance start to arise, when issues around water quality performance start to arise. We need that visibility. So risk has become a really strong learning for us from both the independent reviews.
Yeah, I mean, well, you touched on risk. So I think in your report, during site interviews, there was no structured mechanism for how to capture or escalate risks from the operators. So that presumably was incredibly concerning to you.
And just to be clear, it's not my report, it's the board commissioned this report. But so that was exactly what I'm talking to. Historically, the water industry, and certainly in my experience, it might not be more widely undertaken, but the risk is managed at a local level, and they manage it, as you might imagine, with this is the job list for the day, and I'm going to undertake this. That isn't good enough anymore. That effectively needs to be escalated so there's complete visibility of risk right the way through the organisation. And that's what would have prevented this event. It allows us to operate in an environment which is really water stressed and everything needs to be running to maintain supply. And that is a key element of the transformation that we have launched as a result of these two events and from the learnings of the previous years in terms of how tight our system is operating.
So you talk about risk, and the regulator's there to manage that risk, hold you to account. You didn't carry out any jar testing in October. That was something that the DWI found. Despite that there being a requirement under regulatory notice to do so, and they found that had the optimisation process been followed, the original coagulant should have worked. So there seems to be a complete lack of acceptance that there is, risks need to be managed, they need to work, but you're not even complying under your regulatory notices in respect of lead up to this event.
We did miss a jar test, I agree, and that's unacceptable. In terms of being able to control the process, post the water quality challenges, we didn't. I think I mentioned this earlier. It's a problem-solving process. So once presented with a treatment work that's not behaving, there's a set of things to try and do. I don't think we did that in a structured enough way to get to the point of resolution. We ended up changing the coagulant as the solution, but the DWI were right.
You didn't do a jar testing till the 28th of November.
Yeah, we missed a jar test. And that is unacceptable. And it may well have given us an even earlier warning than the one we had in November. But as the DWI said, the 9th of November was the earliest indication that the treatment works was was not performing as it should. So, but I fully take it that we should have reacted earlier to that. And like I say, the problem solving, we were doing a lot. You can see from the Drinking Water Inspectorate's report that we were not asleep at the wheel in terms of the response on the site. It was ineffective in terms of resolving the issue.
Well, let's talk about being asleep at the wheel, shall we? Because in the control room, right, that the DWI set out what you were doing there. It's only manned Monday to Friday during the day, and there's no one there otherwise to monitor issues and nothing to see the emerging problems. Do you not think that's being asleep at the wheel?
No, I'm afraid that's not correct. So we have a 24/7 man control room that's got full visibility of all the treatment works, all our 88 treatment works, and the different steps that exist, and they're all alarmed. So we've got full, in fact, I could fire it up on my laptop and look at all 88 treatment works now. So we've got full visibility of all those treatment works. And like I say, they're all alarmed. They got warning alarms, high alarms, low alarms. There's alarms set on all those different treatment works.
Well, the DWI recommended better response systems in respect of your control rooms in 2018, 2022, 23, but even in April 24, you still haven't taken up any of those recommendations.
I'm not familiar with recommendations relating to the control room. It might be related to
in terms of your response systems.
So the control room had visibility. The control room operates largely to assist when staff are not on site. So the staff on site have local alarms. They see a local, effectively mimic of the treatment works, and they operate that. The control room operates out of hours, if you like, to have the same view. And I think that the alarms showed, and the trends, more importantly than the alarms, showed there was an issue. And again, I go back to we didn't respond to it quick enough. That was. I don't think it was an issue so much of visibility, but of reaction to the visibility. We've all looked at the data since, including both independent reports and not generating any new data, can see where there was a response required that was different to the one we gave.
It's quite concerning because I think in correspondence, Mr. Train, you just set out that in terms of staffing, this is sort of in line with industry standards in correspondence.
And it isn't.
Nothing to see here, Gov. It's all fine.
No, so the response that I put in writing was an attempt to demonstrate why we had said what we had said, which was the question that the chair asked us within his letter. Different companies, different scale of works, different vulnerabilities will operate sites in different ways. But this is a pretty normal industry standard manning site control room operations. Is there an opportunity to improve that? Yes, there is. And that is part of our transformation plan, so that we get a more proactive rather than reactive view of the situations on site, so that we can proactively manage better. We have essentially become a very responsive organisation rather than a proactive organisation. And when we talk about control systems, I think this is one of those areas where we really need to invest as an organisation.
You told the chair that you'd been in post since 2022, and obviously your role is to hold the executive to account. Are you concerned that safety wasn't one of the company's values, or isn't one of the company's values?
No, safety is very much in the company's DNA.
But it's not one of your. It's flagged in your own report that so you've got a reactive, as you said, reactive and distinctive approach to safety. It's not part of your.
Again, so our response in this situation was very reactive. And that's one of the learnings in terms of, what data were we looking at to understand the risks that were being taken on the site. We have said we didn't react to the signals of the changes quick enough.
In terms of the culture of the organisation that you oversee? and the scrutiny and accountability. You're not concerned that you've been in post for over 2 years and you never thought that maybe safety should be part of the organisational.
It is part.
Well, it's not though. It's not in the report.
And that's talking of one dimension of safety in terms of the processes. There are multi-factors in terms of the organisation, but organisationally, we want to do the right thing for customers, and we've talked about our failures in doing that in this instance.
I think the reason why I'm pushing this point is because the report talks about groupthink. And obviously, as the chair, as the non-executive directors, it's your responsibility to guard against that. And it's concerning that you don't seem to be doing your job properly.
And in looking at the outcome of the investigation report, we are bolstering the executive team to, and the people that we have brought in and will be bringing in are from outside the organisation, and that will create more challenge in the executive team around the decisions and the actions and the directions that are taking. So we have recognised that.
Do you understand why it's so important though? Because if you read the DWI report, the company places too much focus on attention on the bad batch theory for the coagulant, which means that theory effectively fits the narrative being put forward that's outside the company's control, even though DWI states there's no evidence for that being the case. So if there's a lack of critical thinking going on in respect of you and your role of your non-executive team, that seeps through into the company's culture, and then that has a real direct impact on its customers and on how it operates in the day-to-day.
At the point in time that the incident was occurring, the first thing you do as a response is to look at what's different. What was different was a change in coagulation batch. So there was a changeover. So there was a natural response to look at cause and effect at that point in time. That turned out to be false, and and therefore delayed the organisational and operational response in this instance, in this measure.
Thank you, Chair.
I'm struck by the fact that you keep conceding mistakes, but you've never yet explained why these things were allowed to happen, and why these things were allowed to happen over a course of years. Caroline, how long have you been a non-executive director for?
I've been a non-executive for just over a year.
Just over a year. So some of this was happening on your watch.
Yes, that's right.
But you were still allowed to mark your own homework.
So the reason for instigating the independent review was from discussions with the board members around how the Pembury incident and the impact on customers of Tunbridge Wells was not something that we were talking about as a board, to be brutally honest. It wasn't on our risk radar. What we were talking about...
You don't think if you'd been doing the job of a non-exec it should have been?
I think we were very heavily focused on some of the known issues across South East Water, which have been the lack of resilience, lack of headroom, the impact on customers because of the supply-demand issue. And it is true to say that we spent a lot of time focusing on that.
We've heard from David here about risk, as if suddenly you've just discovered risk as an issue for the first time.
No, and I think we have been talking across. As I've been appointed, I've got a lot of experience in asset management and engineering, plus water sector and safety critical environments, and have been meeting with the team to discuss asset management and to discuss how we look after and maintain our assets. I think one of the key findings from this report is around the visibility of some of the risks. And that is something that we absolutely need to improve, such that we can see the risks on single points of failure, like Pembury, and can review that we are taking the right action, as has been recommended in this report and the DWI report, and have direct visibility that that is happening, so that we can prevent incidents like Pembury happening again.
You sit there today and tell us that it won't happen again.
Unfortunately, I can't sit here today and say it won't happen again.
No.
We have specifically for Pembury, taken the action and overseen that the action has been taken, immediate responses to ensure that we have got greater visibility of the system, of the water quality process that goes on in Pembury. And I think the DWI are absolutely right to talk about early monitoring and visibility of
In the
that.
same way that they were right to talk about all the various things that they'd been talking about for years, and frankly, South East Water had just ignored.
I think it's very true to say that having the two independent reports has really given us a different perspective and to help really inform the conversations that we are having.
Well, let's just look at the independence of your report. You were commissioned by the board.
Yeah.
You later brought in 3 other assessors, if I can put it like that. How far into your report process were these people brought in?
When did we appoint them?
Yeah.
So it was before Christmas that I've had the first conversation with the lead investigator. He is known to me. I've not worked with him.
When was he appointed?
When was he appointed? He started work between Christmas and New Year. I think in terms of payments, that would have been early January.
So what has your report found that the DWI had not already found when we heard from them in January?
I think the findings that the DWI presented at the first committee is in line with what we have found. The reason we did this was to provide a...
You didn't accept the findings of the DWI report?
I think
Or
what
if
we
you
wanted...
accepted them, what was the point of your report?
The point of our report was to look internally at broader factors as what was going on and how had we not seen this coming when we really should have done. And we brought in a range of independent people who had not been associated with South East Water previously to provide that insight. And I think it's been really helpful that they have looked at this. They've had the opportunity to talk to a number of employees of South East Water to really help inform the view of what we must do next. I think it's fair to say that a lot of the findings that we have in the independent review has already, things are in motion already.
Well,
However,
why did they go wrong in the first place? That's the question that we've not heard answered by David.
why did it go wrong?
Yeah. Why did the failings that led to the incident in November, December, and then the later one in January, why did they happen?
So there's no single root cause. I would say that it is not due to water quality variances of extremities. It's fragility across the system. So Pembury operates a chemical process fundamentally, and layers of protection have been gradually eroding, and we didn't have sight of the system as a whole.
Is that not what you're there to do as a non-exec director?
That is what we're
So
there.
why didn't you?
Because at the time, a lot of the focus was on the long-term resolution, which is desperately needed, the investment that we need to make in Pembury. I think there has been a breakdown in some of the layers of risk reporting and the approach, which is quite normal within the water sector, to report risk at a site-by-site level. We need to be much better at analysing this. We need to be looking at our single points of failure. We are in a very good position to have the investment now to be able to increase headroom, increase resilience. But fundamentally, until we get there, we really do need to be making sure that we've got the control of the sites as a system and understand the controls that need to be in place to ensure that water can be supplied to our customers.
What sort of company did you think you were joining when you joined the board? Did you realise you were coming into this sort of setup?
I knew I was joining a water stressed company, and part of my reason for...
The problems go far beyond water stress.
Sorry, go on.
The problems of the company go far beyond water stress. They are surely much more deep-seated than that.
I think prior to me joining the company, that is not something that...
Did you read the DWIs and the Ofwat reports going back to 2018 before you joined the board?
Not going back to 2018, but I did read the DWI reports. I think it's an excellent source of understanding how a company is performing. But I'm very passionate about the water sector and wanted to bring my experience to the board when they have got significant demands in increasing the amount of investment and clearly a need to look at the asset management and the resilience of the network.
Okay. Barnett, you're going to do some questioning in relation to changes on incident preparations.
Yes, I mean, if we sort of go back to 2018 and the sort of beast from the East incident, and then 4 years on from that, Mr. Hinton, when the 2022 outage occurred affecting 85,000 customers, your own analysis, the company's own analysis at the time, found that 61 actions identified for the 2018 event had not been implemented. And here we are at the end of 2025, and another 60,000 customers impacted. What faith can we have now that you are learning lessons, and we're not going to get into this Groundhog Day situation, as my colleague in the area, Nusgani, described it, where 1 year after another there is just problem after problem. The company is not learning its lessons.
I'm going to have to come back to you on that. I don't recognise 61 incomplete actions on Beesman East.
It was in 2022.
Okay. 2022, there's a number of actions in there, which again, I don't recognise 61 being incomplete. We have the list of actions we put in place following all these events, and the scale of our response, which is one of the real challenges, the scale of the response across a wide geographical area. Then, like I said before, we've employed 20 tanker drivers just to do alternative water. We can set up to 10 or 12 bottled water stations. In Beeston East, we could only do 2. We've got contracts to deliver to livestock with third parties so that we can peak lop. We've got third parties to deliver to vulnerable customers. We've got third parties to assist with bottled water stations. You understand that is necessary to have the third party support because you suddenly need a demanding resource, potentially instantaneously. And all those are in place, as are some learnings already from the recent event. So the communication about bottled water stock levels has been mentioned today already. We've developed, for want of a better expression, an app which allows us to communicate with each other and soon to be with customers about live stock levels. So there's a list of learnings that we've done from each one. We hadn't had, prior to 2018, any events that were greater than the burst main and 18-hour interruption for a much smaller number of customers. So we've had to resource and increase the resource exponentially. Like I said before, we have not got all the way there. There's more we need to do on livestock. There's more resource we need to do on priority services register. Missing any customer on the priority services register, I'll get deeply upset about. And we're going to make sure that doesn't happen. That's further resource in a technology largely and in a list of priority services. So we've moved on an enormous amount, but we are not fully there yet.
You mentioned livestock. It's interesting. My colleague Helen Waitley said to me ahead of the meeting that you were dismissive, frankly, of farmers when they raised concerns towards the end of last year because they couldn't access water. Now, I appreciate there is a hierarchy of priorities in terms of vulnerable customers, etc. But would you accept that you were dismissive of farmers?
Absolutely not. I mean, I found it a really tricky issue. We were trying to prioritise, as you rightly say, between the different areas, and it was an uncomfortable conversation. I would not like anyone to be concerned about their livestock, and it doesn't exist. This issue doesn't exist across our patches. There's both farming livestock, and there's also, if you like, owned livestock, like in a domestic property, so horses. So we have now set up again with a dedicated contract to be able to deliver standing water to livestock. Our next step, which we promised, is to create a livestock register, which will be the first in the UK, so we understand where the livestock are prior to the event happening, rather than being reactive to the livestock. It's something it's something that we know is live. If I came across dismissive, I apologise. That was not my intention.
And just in terms of escalating matters more quickly, it was something we discussed at the previous hearing here, and there was some criticism that perhaps things had not escalated. Do you have faith in a multi-agency approach to the local area, the local resilience forum, etc., to be able to implement action plans more quickly?
Yeah, and we are working really hard with the local resilience forums. We've got some workshops we're doing with local resilience forums and stakeholders to examine the response to alternate water in what everyone's calling peacetime, so that we can look at the locations of the bottled water that we all agree for different times of the year. And we're working really closely with the local resilience forums to run joint exercises to test both of our responses. And there's a real keenness from the local resilience forums to assist in some areas. So there's a real keenness to assist in priority service register deliveries, for example. And we need to coordinate that because, again, I go back to the biggest worry is that we don't get a delivery. So when we need coordinated resources and coordinated activity, but we are working very hard with the local resilience forums to do that, and they're very receptive to that, and they've really supported us during both events. They were extremely supportive.
Well, you would accept that some of the sites chosen to distribute water last time was pretty farcical in terms of their accessibility. The other services that they were being used for at the time, for example, was what not the shuttle bus to Heathrow location, etc. Train rail replacement service. All of that, I hope, is now being taken into account. Can you give us the confidence that in a future event, those sites are already identified and are appropriate?
We had sites identified, and what we need to do, and what this highlighted to us, and it seems obvious when you say it now, is different sites for different times of year and understanding what is going on locally. So, for example, we knew there was a Christmas event which needed to use the car park that we intended to use. We didn't know that. If we'd have spoke to the local authority, they would have informed us that car park wasn't available. Again, with the rail strike, we were not aware that effectively that the buses would be using the car park, etc. So that goes back to working really closely with local resilience forums to understand the local response is the response that we need to give, the other thing we're working hard with local authorities on is local, if you like, bespoke bottled water stations that effectively drop off in parish car parks, Cub Scout huts, those kind of things. That was the population of small villages very much wanted to run that themselves. And again, it's a control issue, making sure everyone gets it, but it then eliminates the need for some of the really, really rural communities to travel a long way to, say, the centre of Tunbridge Wells or the centre of East Grinstead. So again, that is on our action list. We did it a couple of occasions in this particular period, but that's definitely on our action list for the future.
Just one final question on Chair. Mr Train, you received a letter from 6 local MPs in January, Helen Whately, Mims Davis, Rosie Duffield, Helen Grant, Katie Lamb and Tom Tugendhat, calling for a change of leadership. Now, MPs are not shy of writing letters, but it's unusual for them to write a letter of, I think, calling for such a severe change in a local private company. Ms Sheridan, what was your reflection on that letter?
Well, I think, as we've already discussed around the board back Dave and the reasons for that. And, I acknowledge, and I think as a board we really do hear the voice of the MP. They've got an important job to do and are representing their constituents. As Chris has already outlined, we have to look at the entire picture and the risks that we are trying to manage. And it is fair to say, whilst the reading of both the independent reports, both our internal one plus the DWIs, is difficult reading, a lot of the findings have already had action undertaken by Dave and the executive team that simply just aren't going fast enough. And therefore we need to ensure that we put this transformation plan around South East Water so that it can go faster for customers. We have made changes to the leadership team and new people have been coming in. We, as a board and the independent non-executives, have been working very closely with the executives to help articulate our concerns and the focus that is necessary. So in response, I think we acknowledge and understand their concern, but we are here to do the right thing for our customers ultimately, for now and for the long term.
Was there unanimous support for the current leadership amongst the board?
As a board, yes.
So the culture of groupthink that you've identified, you think you will fix by adding people to the leadership team?
I think we will fix it, one, by acknowledging that there is a risk with the culture of South East Water, which comes from the history of the company. It's a very family feel to the company. Lots of people have worked there for a long time. Lots of people are residents themselves, the local community, and it has really strong benefits. However, it also has red flags, and what we have done is brought in strength to the executive team, people from broader experience who are have been brought in deliberately to be able to have a voice and a challenge. And I've seen the dynamic on the board as well, which we bring in a voice and a different perspective.
I mean, this
to
culture
challenge.
hasn't just happened, it's grown up over years, hasn't it?
And changing a culture will not happen immediately, but we need to take the steps to, one, identify the risks.
What are the metrics that you will identify as important in identifying that you've been successful in changing the culture then?
So I think there's a number of things that we need to consider as a board, and how do we measure?
What are the metrics? How will we know what success looks like?
Well, I think some of the metrics, one, the outcomes to customers will definitely change, because there's a common thread between the culture of an organisation, the ability for people to speak up and have a systematic approach to risk management, for example. We will see that ultimately in customer outcomes. To measure on the journey to get there, we need to be
Have you got a metric for customer satisfaction?
It's certainly something that we should be considering, and
you should be considering.
There is a measure on customer satisfaction.
Yeah.
Is it differentiated enough?
What measure of improvement do you intend to see in that metric? Can you give us figures today?
So the bit that I think is really important.
Sorry, I'm running this long, so if we can just keep tight to the answers to the questions that we asked, please.
The point I'm trying to make is that what is really important is what local customers are feeling, and that can get hidden
and
in
measure
a
that,
metric.
And you've got a figure at the moment, you've got your baseline. What then do you want to get that figure to? Have you got that figure?
Not at the top of my
You
head.
don't? Okay. Sarah, you wanted to ask some questions.
Thank you, Chair. David, last time you were in front of the committee, you told us that your natural position was to go kind of to the operational side during the crisis back in November, December. Felt like you were going back into your comfort zone. You explained that you've got a team of scientists and technologists that were there to carry out the role. Do you feel that you're now embedding a culture with those kind of frontline staff where they don't feel undermined, and they can then escalate their concerns to you without you feeling as though you've got to head into that space? Because it felt like you would kind of had dropped the reins on some of the more kind of wider strategic elements that was required in your role as the chief executive at that time.
I think the Pembury event was different. So on the Pembury event, it was clearly, as we were experiencing it in the business, it was a water quality driven event. And I have over 15, 20 years experience in water quality. We're not a massive company. I was contributing to that debate on that particular one. On every other debate, I operate the Gold Command. So I oversee the overall approach to the incident management. It was that one particular example where I felt I had, and this is what the culture. I mean, we've talked a lot about the culture of South East Water, and Caroline's absolutely right. The risk of groupthink is one thing, but it's a strong, unified culture that is effectively operating under a period of stress, but nevertheless working for each other. And that was, so I wanted to lend support to the team I knew was under stress in that particular example, for the same reason I visit bottled water stations, the same reason I visit other areas where we're looking at vulnerable customer support. That is the good part of the culture of South East Water. But on all other events and incidents, I'm very much running, as you expect a CEO to run, the Gold Command with the rest of my executive and key members of the management team to oversee the overall. And I did that for the January event, and I've done that for many other events. It was that particular example of the Pembury event, because of the area that it was affecting, that I felt I could add, if you like, a non-CEO piece of expertise, and that's what I did.
What do you think you would do differently in future?
Very much what we've done at Pembury. So put in early warnings, better monitoring, improved escalation processes, problem solving earlier in the process. We put on extra filters at Pembury as an extra stop, but we very much, we are going obviously across the business to make sure this is not replicated anywhere else, and that exercise is already started. We believe that Pembury is a complicated works that has run very stably for a very long time, and that meant we weren't monitoring what we should have done. It didn't give us any alarm bells as we went through, but we should have, using the risk approach we've all spoken about, spotted those issues earlier. The transformation programme and the change programme we put in place very much adds the resource for us to be able to do this and the impetus of the business to be able to do this.
What lessons have you taken from other utility companies to prepare for a stronger incident response performance? And how have other chief executives guided you in terms of your role in an emergency?
So on the first point, we were well aware that one of the companies that have done a very good job on recovery of interruptions is Severn Trent. And we are, as an industry, we do compare best practice. Although we went to compete as in a regulatory framework, we always share best practice and we always share water quality. So we went to see Severn Trent and how they managed it. That was very much how we organised our tanker stock and how we ran it, and was based on a model that we saw working elsewhere. In terms of chief exec support, in terms of my role, we discussed last time about whether I communicated early enough in the event, and I obviously canvassed their opinion on that, and they agreed with me. I got it wrong, and that's very much a lesson that we've learned into the playbook of how we handle future events. And the industry is very good at supporting each other and trying to understand these difficult, because we're all trying to do the public health service for our customers. That's what fundamentally runs through the DNA of anyone who works for a water company, and that's why that sharing goes on.
And how would you implement that change going forward?
In terms of
your response as a chief executive, you've admitted you've got that wrong.
I did get that wrong. We have very much got it was something that I hadn't experienced at that level before. We're using consultants to really help us work out what our effective emergency playbook is, our crisis comms playbook is, what everyone's role in that playbook is. So that is a learning that we went through the pain of getting it wrong, and we're very much, as part of the transformation process is to learn from that, and that is well embedded already into the organisation. We've made a lot of progress in that area in the last 3 months.
How do you think you're empowering your scientists and technical staff and some of your new senior team members?
I'm not a command and control sort of leader, and that is not the style of South East Water. So they are heavily empowered. Bringing in the two external executive is adding a real different dimension, both in terms of allowing the existing executive to have more resource. We're a five-person executive for a number of years. We are a bigger business now. That's one of the big drivers for the change. Just in terms of the effect of the TOTEX that we need to spend, it's gone from 1 billion to 2 billion over a 5-year period. So there's a lot for us to do. So the focus is very much on new ideas, new impetus, and new experience against a lot more to do for our customers, which we're really excited to do. We think we've got a real opportunity to make a difference, and these two new roles are doing that. We very much empower them to do what they need to do in their area, very much empower them to deliver the assets that we need to deliver. We've got a new technical information directorate that's going to be looking at insight we're getting from smart meters. It's a new world when the investment's going to allow us to get customers' resilience back on track where we want it to be, get us ahead of climate change, so that we can get back to a new place where we're really delivering for our customers. That is the North Star of our business.
Thank you, Chair.
You're bringing in consultants now, you said there.
On the communications and the internal expertise on crisis communications as a water company wasn't there.
Right, just on the communications side of things.
We use consultants for various roles, as most businesses do, but the one I was referring to there.
Is that going to cost you then?
Sorry?
How much are these consultants going to cost?
I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's a real. I mean, this is one of our biggest issue, apart from the lack of the fundamental water supply our customers told us, was the communications were poor. So
I mean, I'm intrigued just to explore your role though in Pembury. You lost days because you had the bad batch theory. Did you author that bad batch theory? Who was responsible for that?
It wasn't I did not.
Did you challenge it?
Yes, I looked to see well, by the time I arrived on site and had the site level detail, they'd already swapped the batch to try a different batch. They went back to, as Chris said, then it's pretty, a scientific principle with something, if something starts behaving differently, what's the changing input? And, what we should have done is explore more than one potential cause. So,
Any reason why you didn't?
it was, again, I'll go back to the problem solving. If we'd have...
Exactly, that's what I'd hoped we'd get to this morning. Why didn't you?
So, if we'd... The thing is, sometimes issues on treatment works take a number of days to resolve. That is just a fact. That happens all over the industry. Now, we didn't help ourselves because we didn't spot it early enough. That lost days. And as we've said in other things, the system in South East Waters area means you don't have days because there isn't a lot of storage in the system. So those two things combined. But fundamentally, I'm not blaming the storage in the system on this one. It's a factor, but it's nothing to do with this, is that we didn't spot it early enough. That's, if we'd spot it earlier, we would have resolved it. We could have made it less likely to happen as well with some impacts on site, but for me, is we could have worked our way through that issue and solved it if we'd have spotted it earlier and responded to it earlier.
Tim, oh sorry, Henry, can we...
Just quickly,
Tim needs to get away, so can I... Yeah.
How long have you been working with Severn Trent on best practice? How long have you been learning from them for?
We've probably been talking to Severn Trent since we ordered the tankers, which were about 3 or 4 years ago.
You've been taking best practice from Severn Trent for 3 or 4 years?
On the tanker design, yeah.
So why haven't you been doing best practice internally within your company? Because that was something your report identified.
In which particular area?
Well, it says that this observed on-site visits and interviews where best practice was not implemented. So why are you doing that with Severn Trent, learning from best practice, but you're not doing that internally?
Well, we do always try and seek best practice.
Okay,
On this particular example, we weren't following it.
Your own report says that you don't.
It says we didn't follow best practice.
Okay. Thank you.
You're going to lead us on some questions around long-term infrastructure concerns, and then I'll come back to Josh.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Sheridan, lack of interconnectivity, historically low levels of mains replacements and other issues have been flagged as affecting resilience at South East Water. In your view, why was greater resilience not a priority in earlier price reviews?
So it is, from South East Water's perspective, very conscious of the challenges of the evolution of the network and the fact that there are no resilience standards, and therefore the regulatory framework did not account, and it makes an assumption that the water balance is the prime driver, whereas you will always end up with challenges, particularly towards the end customer point of the infrastructure. And again, this is, if you do a comparison with the energy sector has capacity and capability standards that are in statute, and therefore you can make that judgment around whether the investments were adding to the resilience. Putting forward resilience plans is very challenging in the current regulatory framework, and we can see that through our rationale for going to the Competition and Markets Authority on Ofwat's final determination. And thankfully, we had a recognition from the Competition and Markets Authority, and particularly where Tunbridge Wells customers are concerned, the investments sanctioned through the CMA for Buell improves that level of connectivity and therefore alternatives in terms of the system. Other networks, other water companies have more interconnectivity, particularly those that have had historically large industrial activity going on, where that activity has now gone as the world has changed, but the capacity and the infrastructure has allowed a greater level of flexibility. And one of the challenges of the framework is by doing the comparisons, you don't always take into account the actual infrastructure in the ground. And again, that is illustrated through 88 treatment works for 2.3 million customers is very unusual as an organisation. And that drives, the history of that comes from local communities developing their own resources, and then a framework that has not recognised, modern requirements, modern interconnectivity. As the population has grown within the southeast, that then exacerbates the situation.
I think the committee recognised the points you make about regulation, and Mr Hinton made those points in January as well, and welcomed the IWC's recommendations. I don't think we can completely hide behind the regulatory framework, though. It should be a core part of your business, and understanding that resilience is important in terms of your infrastructure. And Ofwat found that between 2009 and 2024, the price reviews, many of the service reservoirs had deteriorated from grade 3 to grade 4 or grade 5 conditions. So there was a resilience issue. But can I ask you, Mr Hinton, in particular, you told us that Ofwat failed to give you sufficient funding to invest in the resilience of the infrastructure. But Ofwat's told us that the company often failed to make a robust case for funding. Can you respond to that?
I think it's Chris's point, really, is resilience as in terms of a line of funding is relatively new in the water industry. It's been handled in the past under the guise of water resource plans or quality issues. And so resilience in itself, in my mind, can be, it's an outcome, but it's also can be an input. So Chris has mentioned resilience standards. So for me, just so that everyone's clear what I'm...
Can I just say, Mr. Hinton, so because I'm short of time, I've got to go bother a minister about something else in my constituency. My question was, Ofwat says you failed to make a robust case for funding, or had already received funding in previous price reviews to invest in resilience. So how do you respond to the suggestion that you're not providing robust business cases?
The business case is difficult to make in the absence of standards. The business case is effectively on a case-by-case basis, on a community-by-community basis, the most recent example of which is the expansion of Buell Water that Chris mentioned, which we needed to effectively take in front of the CMA as an assessment. So this isn't, I'm not criticising Ofwat here, it's the framework by which the assessment can be made and therefore judged is not there yet. The white paper is proposing it should be there, and once it's there, it'd be easy for both sides, both for the regulator to judge and the company to make the case.
I take that point. I do think it's an important point. But two of you today have talked about the extra £100 million from the CMA's redeterminations. Am I right in remembering that when you asked about this in January, you felt you needed £300 million of investment? So are you satisfied with the £100 million, or do you still feel it was the £300 million figure that was needed?
Well, we have actually got over £300 million for resilience in total. So that's an extra £100 million. And we haven't got everything, but we have got a lion's share of the resilience money that we need. And we very much can progress and make the resilience of the South East markedly improve with that level of investment. So we didn't get everything, no, but we have got well over 300 million, which is fantastic. The previous price review, we had around 70-80 million. So there's a huge step up in the amount of resilience funding that we've now procured for the customers of South East.
And in fact, in the region, you received one of the largest increases in revenue overall, didn't you? So hopefully customers in the region should be seeing improvements in the future. Can I ask about those issues I mentioned at the beginning? Ofwat found problems with the upkeep of treatment works, trunk mains, boreholes and reservoirs, and that maintenance funding should have been applied for over 10 years ago. How can you turn it around as quickly as possible?
I mean, Ofwat makes some points in the investigation there, which that we recognise, and we were always within the regulatory framework balancing the risk of different maintenance choices. We have thousands of maintenance choices every year. We got 88 treatment works, all of which have got thousands of assets on them in total, and so we're constantly trading that off. Boreholes is one we are very acutely aware of. And that's very much in the transformation programme. The overall yield on those is very much in the transformation programme. We wouldn't have made a choice about intervening on another asset when we chose to reduce the maintenance on boreholes. We're constantly making that trade-off choice. We overspent our TOTEX by 100 million. So it wasn't as if we weren't spending the money. We were trying to trade off across different assets. And sometimes those trade-off choices can be challenged and can be wrong because they are very much trade-off choices made at a point in time.
Yeah, I mean, indeed, Ofwat said that you failed to ensure service reservoirs were adequately and regularly inspected for at least 10 years and failed to maintain trunk mains by undertaking sufficient preventative maintenance. It's interesting, by your own papers, since 2017, you've rated the risks of trunk main failure as high or as extreme. I appreciate you've got to trade off different choices around maintenance, but this has been a major issue on your radar for a long time as a business.
I mean, the reason we have trunk mains is a high risk. Even if they were brand new, trunk mains would be high risk for South East Water because we have a linear system. So if a trunk main fails, every customer downstream of that trunk main will fail. So the risk register recognises the importance of those trunk main assets in delivering water to customers, irrespective of the maintenance on it. We do monitor really closely our trunk mains, and our record of repairing trunk mains is very good when they go. Trunk mains are highly expensive, and again, you have to balance replacing the trunk main at the right point in that asset life against boreholes, reservoir, and so that's the constant asset management.
Yes, but even after work, something would remain high risk. Even after mitigation, it would remain high risk.
It would, because it's a single asset failure point. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Just on the Ofwat report, they say that in some cases you're already funded to deliver resilience projects, but you didn't. Why was that?
Last price review, particularly different to this one, we were funded a TOTEX number. So the risk decision was effectively ours to make. And we traded off different projects. I'll give you an example of one we weren't going to do but did. So Barkham is our key works on the south coast of, it supplies 50 to 60,000 customers. And as we went into the period, we started to see more climate change. We had a set of work planned to do at Barkham, but recognising Barkham was a key risk, we completely accelerated that and added much more to the scope of Barkham because we saw that as a new risk. That would have meant we moved money from another allocated area. We weren't funded any schemes against resilience by Ofwat because it was a TOTEX envelope. So the risk choice was ours. So I can't point to any schemes that we weren't done, but we were constantly trading risk. That's what one of our main roles as an executive team and a water company is to try and make those decisions because we're trying to balance affordability with water supply risk. That is the constant challenge that we have.
These were your choices.
Yeah.
Josh, you're going to do some questioning around communications and vulnerable customers.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll start with quite a straightforward question, if I may. Mr. Hinton, how many people work on communications at South East Water?
I think there's teams around 20.
Okay, so that's quite a substantial number then. Do you think that's sufficient in light of the clear shortcomings in your crisis communications over these outages?
Look, I've mentioned already that we've effectively bolstered that resource with third-party expertise and crisis comms. My team are excellent at doing the comms that we need as a water company in what you call peacetime. And we were all challenged, not just the communication team, on what happened in the last few months. So they are very adept at providing information to customers on events, on water efficiency, and all the key bits that a water company needs in its BAU, if you like. But we have bolstered that team in terms of expertise since for crisis communications.
You've brought consultants in, but what happens when they leave? Has the number of people working on comms increased? Have you spoken directly with that team about these failings? Are you addressing the apparent breakdown between the operational and communications teams? Has any crisis comms training occurred? I'm trying to get to the bottom of how you are addressing these clear shortcomings.
I mean, we are developing joint playbooks is the fundamental handover point. So between us and the consultants, we are developing playbooks that would mean that effectively the home team can adopt if the consultants are not there. And we're not a huge company. Of course, I speak to the comms team all the time. They're literally around the corner from me. And so we have conversations about what we could do differently. We had some significant learnings out of this. There's no question. It's not something we were used to dealing with. But we've now developed that skill set. The team size is almost certainly going to increase. I can't tell you to what number, but the team size is going to increase when we get into the position of, if you like, BAU back again, because BAU is very different to what it used to be.
Having worked in communications myself in the NHS, for example, the last team I was in, I think there were 6 of us, and we worked in a big organisation, and we made sure that we had crisis comms plans, not just playbooks, but proper plans and strategies in place for health emergencies across a whole city. And we did that with 6 members of staff. So why do you think with more than triple that you failed so comprehensively to communicate properly with your customers?
I'll have to expand on what the comms team do. Actually, I was significant part of our role is we put infrastructure in the ground, and when we put infrastructure in the ground, we like to make sure we engage fully with stakeholders, local authorities, planning authorities, hold open days, and those kind of activities. And comms team are very much involved in that activity. It's very much part of delivery of a capital scheme. So that's one of the big elements the comms team do. When I say playbook, what I mean is this is a process. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to handle it in the future. We can always call on the external resource to do that. We're very much looking, this is a key stream of how we want to improve going forward about the transformation programme we've got in place, is how we effectively communicate externally to stakeholders, and we haven't mapped that out and written that down as a set of procedures, but that is literally our emergency planning process, which we feed from there. I take the criticism that we couldn't write down a process by which we follow, but that is the process that we follow.
That's why having a strategy is so important, right? Because I can tell you, as somebody who's been a comms professional that's stuck on a call and has to listen into often really technical information, what you need to understand is what does the customer need to know, and when do they need to know it, and in what format are we going to put that out? It's not good enough just to say, well, we have somebody from comms on the call, because this is where that breakdown in communications happens between them and the people who are looking at this on a very technical basis. And that's when you lead to situations like you had last year, where you are communicating out wildly overly optimistic information that we can see from these reports you probably knew was unlikely to be the reality. And then the goalposts constant shift on when customers are going to get their supply back. And so I actually think you're putting your comms team in a really unfair position by not giving them the information that they need to make sure customers are as informed as possible. None of us have a crystal ball, and I think you said this to us last time, but I think it's quite unfair to leave your team without a strategy and to not expect them to have a strategy about how all the different parts of your organisation are going to link in with them when the chips are down and you've got a crisis on your hands.
No, and that's very much, like I said before, that's what we're seeking help in achieving. And the comms team weren't inventing those. The optimism was coming from the field team that were running the event. It wasn't the comms team who were being optimistic, trying to tell customers something they want to hear. And we've got to, we've as a group got to challenge ourselves when that resolution is not obvious and the timing isn't obvious. We've had feedback, and we do quite a lot of customer satisfaction surveys after events. One of the things customers always say, I just want to know when it's going to come back on. I've heard that quoted a number of times in different research pieces. So the temptation for us is to try and tell them when we think it might be on, and that's a trap we fell into. We've effectively, and we're working through that strategy right now, is we're trying to work through what do we do in a situation where we can't nail the resolution time, which we do in many of the events we have, because it does have a firm resolution time. But this is one of those ones where we really need to learn the lessons.
Okay, time is short, so I'm going to move on to vulnerable customers, but I think there's a lot more work needs to be done on the comm side.
Josh, I'm sorry, just before you do, and I'm
Yeah.
loath to interrupt, but how did you fall into that trap? This is surely Water Company Management 101.
The trap I was referring to is providing the customers with an estimation of completion when we weren't entirely certain about whether that would come off or not.
Why?
Why? Well, because otherwise you're communicating an open-ended resolution. So we were giving our best estimate at the time we made the estimate. And it's always a debate between how certain is that estimate, therefore how willing are you to share it with customers, or should you maintain the line of...
You've described this as a trap, and it's the most fundamental one, and you walked right into it.
Well, we also fell into the other trap, which is you don't provide a resolution. So there's a choice when you talk to customers about which one is it, and the choice is governed by certainty. Now, we thought we were more certain about the resolution than we should have been. That's the trap we fell into. that trade-off is real every time we have an event about telling customers what we think is going to be resolved at, or leaving it more effectively.
Josh, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
But
I would just say on that, the bottom line is that if you give people overly optimistic information, then that's what they use to make their decisions on whether to stay put and whether to make any alternative arrangements.
I agree.
If you give people communications that are quite open-ended, we don't know when this is going to come back on. Yes, it's frustrating, but I think the lesson that I hope you'll learn is that it's far more frustrating for your customers to be told, well, it's only going to be 48 hours, and then a week later.
I agree.
You know what I mean?
That is a lesson.
So you will understand the importance of clean water to vulnerable consumers better than I will. And we know that some people have got medical conditions that require them to wash regularly. Others work in professions where hygiene is paramount, including in their home life. Your investigation concluded that public health was protected during the Tunbridge Wells incident. But how can you say that when thousands of people couldn't wash, and the DWI as well found that you didn't prioritise your vulnerable customers adequately?
The public health piece, and I think the DWI independent report talks about this as well. At no time did we put out water which was unwholesome. So for us, that means it's safe to drink, other than under a board water notice, which we did later. So, and that choice was a one of public sanitation choice, and so that was the public health point was related to that point.
Then public health isn't really protected overall if some people haven't got access to water.
I know that is. I mean, it's a fundamental. I mean, that you know, the job we do, and I'm really proud to do the job I do as a water company CEO. It's very. We know how important what we do is to society. We know how important it is for communities. It's absolutely fundamental, and it absolutely breaks all out when we can't do that role properly. And particularly when vulnerable customers are just at the heart of what we're trying to do and trying to achieve. Like I said before, we did 35,000 deliveries, but I hated it that we missed. I think it was 70 out of 34,000. And so that's really what we're trying to achieve the whole time. Public health is at the heart of how water companies people think about their jobs.
Back in January, we asked you about support for vulnerable customers, particularly bottled water. We talked quite a lot about that. And Miss Sefton said that there were a few isolated issues, I think was her phrase. But the analysis from the DWI, having looked at this extensively, says that there was a lack of early action, lack of planning, and that had a massive impact on vulnerable customers in particular. For example, there wasn't a vulnerable customer team set up until days after the incident even started, and you didn't grasp the needs and the locations of vulnerable customers or important sites like care homes and GP surgeries. So you've said many of the recommendations, action points that you found in your report have already been actioned. So have you looked at those points as part of that?
Absolutely. So I think there's a difference between didn't set up a vulnerable group and we started to deliver into PSR customers many in advance of them going off of water for the event over the weekend. It's right to say we didn't set up a team, but we were delivering to those customers. In terms of the critical establishments like GP surgeries, etc., we have very much a already agreed process which we test. In fact, I think we are testing another hospital today on a routine test of whether we can provide provision of tankard water into that hospital. We've got a number of very defined ways of dealing with particular named care homes, etc. But they tend to be bespoke, and what we've committed to in terms of how we can help them. So some of them have tanks, we can immediately just tanker water into them. Some don't have tanks, they need a pressurised input. So it's a very bespoke reaction, which without doing the full survey piece in advance of all the different potential critical units, including GP surgeries, including nursing homes, including schools, is we've committed to go around all of those, understand what their needs are, so how we could supply alternative water to all those individual premises.
You're confident when the next incident comes that you're not going to have 5 dozen vulnerable customers that aren't supported?
That is absolutely what we're aiming at. So what we really need, I mean, we've had great support from the local resilience forums on this. This is often a question of understanding the live PSR as well. So people don't necessarily register with us. We do what we can to try and promote this scheme. And we welcome any support we get from any third parties on the promotion of this scheme. But we do have customers appear during the event saying I'm vulnerable for a different reason. It might be transient vulnerability, but we really need to respond to those too. And quite often that's the area in which it becomes more difficult to deliver the service we really, really need to.
Okay, just to tie this off, it seems to me that whether it's crisis comms or support for vulnerable customers, the preparation that you as South East Water deemed to be adequate doesn't stack up against either practice in pretty much the whole of the rest of the industry or the expectations of your customers. So are you going to have these emergency plans properly audited independently to make sure that they are fit for purpose?
And in fact, they are audited independently. Many of our emergency response documents are audited by, in fact, the DWI in a capacity as it's overlooking the Security and Emergency Measures Direction. And we are absolutely keen. I mean, I think our independent report said we had a very full emergency plan, but it wasn't overly, accessible.
Well, DWI said that you didn't provide them what they were looking for in the communications front.
The communications
it was wholly
front.
inadequate, what you sent to them.
I don't know the detail of that particular request or our response, I'm afraid. But yeah, we absolutely committed to making sure those things are in place and those emergency plans are in place. Very much a part of our response going forward.
Thank you, Chair.
Do you think communication would be better if you had more of a command and control style, as you referred to earlier on?
In some instances, I think one particular style all the time is something that, well, I think
you didn't go out and face the public in Tunbridge Wells. You didn't. The same thing again in January.
I didn't go on the media. I've been to numerous scrutiny committees since. I've met with.
Well, at the moment, when people are turning on their taps and nothing's coming out, you weren't to be found.
No, and I was running the Goal Command for that event, and as I described at the last hearing, we have very much had a playbook on our communications, which is we have an operations person who runs the first interview and then it escalates. And I admit, as I admitted earlier, that I should have gone out earlier. I did broadcast to all customers actually in the southeast of England. I have been to numerous scrutiny committees and local events to discuss South East Water's plans with customers directly.
Chris, Caroline, you can't be happy with what you've heard about communication with customers as a safeguard for the customer, are you?
No.
Were you aware of that, just how bad things were when you gave your confidence to David?
I was aware of
Okay.
the fact that we had...
It was your decision then?
It was not my... I'm fully aware. We made a lot of mistake on communications.
You say
through
we,
the proof.
you mean you as non-execs or we as South East Water?
We as South East Water.
Right. You as non-execs, would you do the same thing again?
It was a very dynamic situation where...
The question is, would you do the same thing again? With hindsight, do you think you made the right call?
In terms of...
Knowing what you knew, which you've told us, and continuing then to give confidence to your Chief Executive.
Yes.
Okay. Jenny, that couldn't be clearer.
Thank you, Chair. David, to you. So at the heart of all of this, communications, your social contract to operate in the role that you do as Chief Executive, I think we're all centring and agreeing on trust. Do you agree with that? So your trust is central with your customers, that kind of social contract to deliver. Now I'm going to put it to you that your trust has not got better. In fact, I'll say it's got worse. Your communications hasn't got better. I'd again say it's got worse. Purely on the fact alone that in March of this year, you sought to get an injunction on Ofwat's investigation and report into you. Whose decision was that? And do you recognise and acknowledge that to seek to challenge it and subsequently to seek to have an injunction to stop that report coming out, that, by the way, doesn't even refer to what we're talking about today, it refers to issues between 2020 and 2023, that does nothing to build trust with your customers. It does the complete opposite.
It was a board decision, to answer your question, first question. And what was behind the decision was we felt there was more dialogue to be had with Ofwat on a number of issues in their investigation decision. We didn't felt like we'd exhausted all that process yet, and we're keen to exhaust that process. So we had a decision to make on trust about whether we should do that. But equally, we wanted to make sure that the Ofwat's decision, which ultimately also goes in the public domain and impacts trust, has properly reflected the dialogue that we'd like to have had with Ofwat at the time. So that was what we were balancing that. We're super conscious of the trust impact of anything that we do publicly. We're super conscious of the trust impact of anything we say publicly or anything we do with our regulators. But we made it in good faith. We made it with an attempt to try and complete the dialogue with Ofwat before it was published, and that was fundamentally behind the decision.
Were communications in the room when you made that decision?
Were
communications in the room?
We absolutely consulted.
Were they in the room when you made that decision?
Well, I don't know.
I would imagine they weren't in the room, because I can't imagine that anyone would advise you that that was a good move to make, to seek to have an injunction against criticism of your organisation so that the public couldn't see it. If you wanted to build trust with your customer base and to fulfil your social contract, you'd be confident having that discussion in public with Ofwat to say, we don't agree with this, we have questions on this, we've invested in this. You'd have that publicly. You wouldn't seek to have an injunction.
It was. I mean, we weren't trying to stop it. We were trying to just
That's
finish.
That's what an injunction does.
No, we would have just delayed it. We were just trying. We were trying to effectively finish the dialogue. That was what we were trying to achieve by that particular.
But it's not honest. It's not an honest conversation about the failings and flaws and issues within your organisation that you're prepared to have publicly. So, and we're clearly not going to agree on this. But I would suggest until you can understand that, you can't build trust with your customer base. Nor can you have good communications.
We do understand, and we discussed that issue. We discussed that issue of trust in making that decision at the board.
So I think it refers to a fleeting comment I made earlier, that you might be asking the right questions, but you're not having the right answers when you're asking those questions. Which brings me to my next question. You mentioned right at the beginning that you brought in additional skills to the board, either exec or non-exec, I can't recall which. Can you tell me if where those skills come from, whether they're inside the sector, do they come from other organisations within the sector, or do they come from outside the sector?
So we've got two different roles. So we've got an investment delivery director, which is effectively all about delivering the capital that we need, the infrastructure, the resilience we've talked about, as a focused role. That activity used to sit under the operations director, but it's such a big programme, it's so important for us. We created a new directorate for that. We took the individual who's running that effectively from the delivery, it's a water delivery supply chain role, so effectively working in other water companies.
Where do they come? Which water company?
One of their experiences at Anglian, but they've got more than just that. And then the other role we've got as a director is on the technical insight director. This is the area where we're looking to grab really useful insight from smart metering, which we've started and is getting to be exciting development for the whole industry, smart networks, and put that into real actionable insight for the rest of the business. So we set up that directorate as a new one. I think it's relatively unique in the industry, and we took the leader of that from effectively a power company who's gone through a transition program, because within their program of work as well is change for the business. So the transformation program.
Which power company? Which power company?
UKPN. So, and under the UKPN banner, it was doing very much the same thing. It was change. It was change and transformation using digitalisation, and that is a big part of our future strategy. And that's why we wanted to seek expertise from a relevant, but not but very much a different mindset type organisation.
Mm. Caroline, you were at Thames Water. What years were you there?
I was there from 2021 to 2023.
That wasn't exactly the heyday of Thames Water.
No, it wasn't.
What skills are you bringing and advice are you bringing, and what critical questions are you bringing to the board?
So I spent just over 2 years at Thames Water, and during my role there as engineering and asset director, I learned a huge amount about the water sector.
Including what's not working from a Thames...
And absolutely the challenges that the water sector is facing across both the water and the waste potential for Thames. But prior to that, and the reason I went to work at Thames was the experience and broad breadth of experience I've had across sectors to bring in that learning. I've worked at safety critical organisations, and in fact the organisation I work for now is a safety critical organisation, and it's that breadth of experience, the challenges that these organisations face, the importance of having effective asset management at the heart of some of the decision and risk management decisions that are needed. And that's what I brought to Thames Water. It's also what I bring as a non-exec to South East Water.
Okay. Ofwat, going back to Ofwat's report, they identified an array of issues, as I said earlier, between 2020 and 2023, including that you contravened the Section 27 of the Water Industry Act. Why has compliance been such a problem for you?
That particular is a subject to investigation, which is effectively running an efficient network. And compliance is the wider question, is a key thing in a water company. The regulations, the compliance framework around it. The water quality compliance is the most important of all. The ability to supply wholesome water, which is generated effectively, quite often said to be the best water quality in the world in the UK. That compliance framework. It's fundamental. We are not achieving it 100% of the time, and that is what we're striving to do all the time. Strive 100% of the time on compliance. There are sometimes conflicting pressures. I mean, it's not a choice we make, but sometimes we don't achieve compliance because of those conflicting pressures. But I can't emphasise enough. It's not just South East Water, but how important compliance is. It is the fundamental trust underpinner of the UK water industry and the drinking water quality as a whole.
Yeah. And you're not compliant?
We're not 100% compliant,
yeah.
But we strive for compliance. Compliance is an absolute number one objective of South East Water as well as many water companies.
It just goes back to the point I was trying to make at the beginning, that you can't build trust for as long. When you say it's absolutely vital and fundamental to what you do, and you're not doing it, you cannot build trust, and we don't see any improvement coming through it. I'll leave it as my final question here. Okay. Your company is one of the worst performers in the sector. I think that we've examined that in thorough detail in the last two sessions that we've had you here for. In your appeal to the 2024 price review, you received a compromise from the CMA for your supply interruption targets. Are these now achievable?
Someone once described to me that South East Water is a good company with a really big interruptions problem, and I think is a good company with a really big interruptions problem. So we are often described as poor.
Saying that BA are a really good aircraft carrier. They can't get off the ground.
I understand that, but our water quality performance is good. Our leakage performance is good. There are a number of other areas where the teams do perform really, really well. The interruptions itself is, as we've talked to at both hearings now, is a real challenge for us. It's massively solved with the infrastructure investment. The targets are still challenging. The targets are still very challenging. The infrastructure is going to help us achieve those, as will the others. I think they're challenging for all companies. There aren't many companies that achieved the 5-minute target in the last period. But as I said before, it's the infrastructure, it's the investment that's absolutely key.
Thank you, Chair.
The operation was a success, but the patient died.
I was trying to make a point, Chair, that we do other things well. Water quality is generally good performance, leakage is good performance.
Well,
I was trying to make a wider point.
As we heard from the DWI last time, that's true generally in this country. You go to the tap, you turn on the tap, and you get water that you can drink. Is that so exceptional?
No, in this country is exceptional.
Just want to go back for a second to the question that Jenny raised there about the injunction, because the judge's comments in relation to that injunction application were quite remarkable, were they not? Have you read them, Chris?
Yes.
Caroline, are you aware of them? Caroline, are you aware of them?
I'm aware of the appraisal of what
right.
said,
I mean, what the judge said, that blocking publication to protect a company reputation amongst credit rating agencies was, quote, objectionable in principle, end quote, and demonstrated, quote, real incoherence, as investors are unlikely to be content to rely on a credit rating based on materially incomplete information. He goes on to mislead credit rating agencies could cause investors to enter into contracts which they would not otherwise have entered into. When I asked you the role of the non-executive director at the top, you spoke about the importance of governance. Yeah. Is this the sort of governance that you as a company feel comfortable with?
So we had been in dialogue with Ofwat around this inquiry since 2023 for a long time. And there had been a continuing dialogue. And as Dave said, there were still elements where we were in discussion. So this came as a surprise to us. We have absolutely no intention of misleading anybody in terms of the nature of the organisation.
You can understand why the judge said what he said.
I can.
Would you dispute it? Do you think the judge was wrong?
The judge has a perspective on the basis of the information that was submitted to him, and he made a judgment on that information. Do I feel he was absolutely right in his assessment? Then no, I don't.
Where was he wrong?
So
what part of what I've read out to you do you disagree with?
So I absolutely disagree with the misleading comment.
So you think that leaving incomplete information available to credit agencies is not misleading?
I don't think we were aiming or intending to mislead anybody at that point in time. We were
Whether or not that was
in
the purpose, you can see how it would be misleading to anyone who was a prospective investor, could you not?
I could, yeah.
Well, thank you. Henry, you wanted to come in.
Can I just ask, is there a power in this country that you feel that you have to adhere to? As in you dispute the judges, you don't take seriously what the Prime Minister says, you don't take seriously what the Secretary of State is, you seem to hold Parliament. What power in this country do you feel that you can, as a company, that you can sort of adhere to?
Well, I think that's a complete misrepresentation of the comments.
Right. I don't know if anybody has anything else. I think that concludes our questioning for today. I won't pretend that I've yet got all the answers that I feel the committee really needs to have. It may be that we need to follow this further upstream and see where the shareholders and the owners are involved in all this, because what we have here is something that is wholly unsatisfactory for the customers. It's clearly unsatisfactory for the regulators, and I'm still no clearer about who thinks that it is satisfactory. So for the moment, however, we will conclude this part of the proceedings for the moment. For now, I will proceed. I will suspend the committee for a minute or two while we change the witnesses at the table. Order. In session, and we have a fresh panel of witnesses. Gentlemen, can I invite you just again, for those following our proceedings and for our own official record, for you to introduce yourselves. Chris, I'll start with you and move along the panel.
Good morning, I'm Chris Walters and I'm the Chief Executive of Ofwat.
Marcus Rink, Chief Inspector, Drinking Water Inspectorate.
Hello, I'm Mike Keel, I'm the Chief Exec of the Consumer Council for Water.
Okay, gentlemen, you sat through that evidence session and you heard it. You've provided reports for the committee already. Marcus, I'll start with you if I can. Where are the most salient agreements and differences between your report and what South East Water keep insisting on calling their independent report into the Tunbridge Wells incident?
Yeah, my initial thought on the independent report was that it was very high level. It lacked detail, and it wasn't underpinned by evidence. Most notably, maybe I'm a detailed person, it did say it lacked detail. The executive summary seemed to make up the larger part of the report. I thought there were some fundamental issues with it, probably on the grounds that it seemed to be papering over some of the cracks. That's the mildest way I can put that. It's asserted that DWI mounted its investigation based upon the fact that there was political pressure. I can say that actually the reason we responded to the event was because we weren't notified by the company. So I was notified by my staff that there was a developing event, and we deployed to the site because we weren't notified. The second observation I made with the report is it seemed to suggest that because they didn't have monitoring at site, they couldn't understand or didn't understand the root cause problem. And I found that rather strange because if you recall, following my last appearance on the 6th of January giving evidence, I said that the problem was because there wasn't sufficient monitoring, and that's what led to the failure. So in some ways, the report agrees with what I said in that there was insufficient monitoring. Now, there were, for instance, about 7 points, I think, overall, which I gave evidence to the committee last time, which were refuted by the chair of South East Water. Partially has been agreed in the, and I say the independent report, but it is a report by the company for the company, written for the executive.
You're with you on that one, I think.
So, for instance, I said there was insufficient tests. The chair said, true, but there was no causal link. The South East Water independent report said that they actually hadn't done any tests at all over the months. It was supposed to be monthly. So our report then said that there was reduced visibility and it would have likely improved the situation had they done that. We identified that there was poor filter performance. The chair refuted that. He said that there was some deterioration, but it was under control until the 28th of the 11th. Their report said that there was worsening performance which wasn't escalated, and we said that the signals were clear that there was loss of control over a projected period. In fact, we were able to show that there was loss of control since about summer. There were signals. I said there was manual interventions and no visibility. I was specifically talking about the visibility around coagulation. Thank you for making the point about coagulation, because in 2015, the company had put forward a proposal to have a visibility on coagulation. We don't understand why the company didn't do that. So a decision taken 10 years ago has had an outcome 10 years later because they didn't have that visibility. The letter from the chair said there was 24/7 monitoring. I think the question was made. That was monitoring of turbidity. There was also a point about the control room. In fact, what we've noticed is that the control room on the 26/11th on DAF 3, when it failed, reset the alarm, which shouldn't have been done. So there may have been visibility on turbidity, but it was reset. I would challenge that. And I, certainly on the critical parameters, as I said, South East Water said that they weren't monitored. We've said that the absence of critical parameters led to the loss of control. And it was the loss of control of that coagulation, which was fixed manual dosing, which led ultimately to the failure of the optimization of the works, which ultimately led to the distress of the DAFs. The DAFs eventually weren't able to backwash sufficiently. That allowed the breakthrough. The signals on that were in fact the turbidity on the DAF, which was showing signs of distress and the number of times of washing. That led to the breakthrough to the activated carbon, which ultimately led to the turbidity in the tank and ultimately led to the shutdown of the works. So what had happened is the lack of visibility led to the failure of the works progressively.
Long story short, I'm not hearing anything where you say, no, we've been contradicted in our findings by what was in the South East Water Report.
In fact,
it strengthens your conclusions.
Well, it has actually. And listening to the panel this morning from South East Water, I didn't hear anything from the panel this morning which contradicted anything that we've said within that report. In fact, if anything, they've accepted it all.
Is there any useful purpose served at all by them doing their own report?
No.
Okay. Chris, Ofwat also recently published its findings on historical supply interruptions for South East Water customers. You've heard what you've heard today. Do you think the lessons are being learned at all?
I think what I've heard today in both what Mr Hinton and Mr Train said at various points in their answers are more of a recognition of Ofwat's position than historically had been the case. And very early on in his answers, Mr Hinton, talked about wanting to engage even more constructively with the regulator. I mean, I welcome both those reflections.
Outside court.
Outside court. They also touched on two other areas which I think are relevant to your question, Mr Chairman. The first was on economic regulation and the role of the price review and the Competition and Markets Authorities process. It is not uncommon in economic regulation for there to be disagreements between the regulator and the regulated, but that is the first time I have heard them couched in a way that I thought was much more conciliatory than is normal, and again I welcome that. And probably the third reflection was Mr Hinton went through in some detail the company's transformation programme, which builds upon its action plan as a response to the incidents. My colleagues discussed that plan with Mr Hinton and his colleagues on Thursday. The initial views were that was a constructive discussion, and there is a step change in the amount of responsibility from our perspective that the company appears to be taking. None of that is a guarantee, but if those three things together represent a long overdue reset moment in the company's engagement with its economic regulator, I would welcome that.
The application for injunction to prevent publication of your report, that's quite remarkable, is it not?
It's not something we were expecting. It turned out to be a moot point because of the decision that the judge was made, and we were able to publish our decision for consultation when we'd intended. That public consultation closed yesterday.
Does that raise any concerns in your mind about the culture within the company?
Part of the reason I made the three reflections that I've made is what I have heard today I think is more conciliatory and more constructive than the sort of mindset that might have led to the injunction, notwithstanding what Mr Hinton and Mr Train said were the rationale for it.
I mean, we had concerns about the candour and the transparency about the way the company was dealing. And then, since that, they tried to block the publication of the report. Is this a company that's learning anything? Is it changing its behaviour at all?
I think on the basis of what I've heard today and interactions with the company since then, we are seeing steps forward being made. Only time will tell if those are sufficient, which is part of the reason I welcome South East Water's commitment to work constructively with us, and we will work constructively with them. But only time will tell.
Yeah. Now, I mean, you've told us in the past, Marcus, that DWI lacks sufficient powers to require cooperation in some circumstances. Is this true also of Ofwat and the Consumer Council, do you feel?
I'm sorry, I missed that. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah. We've heard from Marcus in the past that he feels that part of the inspectorate's setup it involves a lack of sufficient powers to require cooperation in some circumstances. Are you happy at the way... So I'm not talking specifically about South East Water, although it's perhaps quite an instructive case study in many ways. Are you Do you share the same concerns with the powers that your respective bodies have?
Well, as you'll know, the government published a white paper on water sector reform in February, which talks about establishing an integrated regulator for England and a separate regime for Wales. Beneath that, there is a strong desire for the regulator to have a more coherent, stronger set of powers. We support that white paper, and an integrated approach that irons out and streamlines the gaps and inconsistencies and overlaps between our respective responsibilities is something that we have advocated for.
I mean, your investigation is fairly comprehensive, but it took over 2 years to complete it. Does that length of investigatory time have an impact then on the ability of water companies to learn lessons, and as a consequence, your ability as a regulator to maintain public trust?
Well, any enforcement action is towards the top of a pyramid of interventions that we have as the economic regulator for companies. In this particular case, it came after a period of increasingly intense interaction between us and South East Water over a number of years. The investigation itself, as you point out, did take a certain amount of time because it relied on very complex and detailed and specific engineering information, because the company's stance towards us was perhaps not as conciliatory as what I heard this morning, which also adds an amount of time, and because we wanted to ensure that we were doing our best job for customers by making our decision robust to legal challenge. All of which I think is to say that we have a system as an economic regulator that I think does hold companies to account and also oversees and supports them to deliver the record levels of investment that are needed to improve things for customers and the environment.
Mike, from the Consumer Council point of view, what assessment do you have of what you heard in relation to the communication and the ultimate outcomes for the consumers of South East Water, the customers of South East Water today?
I mean, I think none of us should forget just how disruptive this event was. Yeah. This wasn't just an afternoon without water. Yeah. I mean, the December one, 2 weeks, incredibly disruptive. And I think something that is really important to recognise is that this type of interruption of this duration has lasting damage and lasting consequences. We talked about in the session trust. We know that trust is incredibly low with South East Water across a number of metrics. We have just completed a survey which hasn't been released yet. The fieldwork was finished last Monday. They looked at the two events. So looked at the November-December event and then the events in January. And that has a big sample of people who were affected by the November-December events plus January, and some people affected by both. And what is incredibly concerning is the lasting legacy that this has, not just on trust, but on behaviour. So, forgive me that I have to turn to my notes. The research
there was quite a lot to note.
Is massive. But 54% of people now store bottled water at home to prepare for future incidents.
In the South East Water area?
The people surveyed who were affected by these incidents. 25% of people feel less comfortable using tap water for washing and brushing teeth. And 19% of people now only drink bottled water since the incident. Now, this is a country with world-class drinking water. This is absolutely awful that is the consequences. So what I didn't hear in the session just now is what is the company going to do to turn this around? Because this isn't about new assets. This is culture, and we touched on this. There's serious cultural issues here about engaging with your customers, treating them with respect. And in this case, they're going to have to do a lot of work to win them back, to rebuild that confidence, because this is not a situation that we want to be living with. We cannot afford to let this persist.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I asked Chris Train about the metrics, the targets that he would set for customer confidence. As I understood it, they know that it's got to get better, but they don't seem to have set any. Is that your understanding?
Correct. There's a customer experience score, CMEX it's called, which measures overall customer experience. And in Q3 of the last financial year, which is the last full set of results, South East Water were 14th out of 17, so lower quartile. And some of the company they keep in that lowest quartile isn't great in terms of water companies. So there's a lot to turn around. And we know that the trust in the water sector is at an all-time low in general as well. So they've got a lot of work to turn that around. I mean, that's just one metric too. I mean, you can repeat surveys like this to test. Are you still keeping stashes of bottled water because you just don't trust that when the weather changes that you might not have water? And I have to say, I did not like what I heard about climate change at the beginning of this session. I think that is dangerous and misleading to suggest that there's some predictions are wrong. That's not. I think that is a misrepresentation. Yeah. The new extremes of climate, of course, this is what happens with climate change. You're going to go outside the envelope, and companies know this. You referred to a 2008 document, that Ofwat's climate change policy statement. I wrote that document. That was my first job in the water sector. So companies cannot say they did not know. Yeah. Companies need to prepare for climate change, not be prepared to reel it out as an excuse.
And in fairness, actually, Ofwat has made that point repeatedly. But, I mean, your evidence, as I understand it, is that there is readily available, objective, customer-facing metrics which would be there. This isn't something that South East Water need to build from the ground up. You're collecting that customer satisfaction, customer response data, but we heard nothing from their analysis on how they would use it. Does that cause you the same concern that's causing me?
Yeah, I'm really concerned. I mean, there's a whole bunch of ways you can test this. There's formal regulatory metrics like CMEX, but you can just measure things like how many incidents you have. We measure customer minutes lost. It's another regulatory metric. You can see with South East Water that's not a clever metric either. So there's things you can use as proxies as well.
So this is what you all do day in, day out, week in, week out. How bad is the Tunbridge Wells incident in the scope of the outages that you routinely deal with?
That's quite a good question, actually, because it was worse than it should have been. In terms of the number of people affected, 60,000, it's by far not the largest event that's ever been affected. For instance, you can look back at Franklaw in 2015, where there were 725,000. You can go back to Mythe in 2007, and there were 275,000 people affected for 14 days with a complete loss of supply due to flooding. These were incidents that were certainly the Mythe incident was well outside of the company's control. What separates this is that this incident was caused in two parts. Firstly, by the company's inability to see the risk. They had normalised risk and therefore couldn't visualise when it was going wrong for a prolonged period of time. And the second thing is that once it went wrong, they weren't prepared, or they didn't have any plans to put in place for communication both to their customers, their stakeholders, nor their regulators. And so this exacerbated greatly the outcome of this. And that was followed by a level of deniability, which the company weren't able to self-recognise. I'm glad that they've gone some way to recognising, but haven't gone far enough. So in terms of a water supply loss, whilst the numbers are not as great as those which have occurred in the past, in terms of the handling, it's probably one of the worst that I've come across in terms of just the way that it happened, just the way that it was handled, just the way that it's been approached afterwards. And it shocks me. I'm grateful to Mike for providing his research to us, and that worries, it concerns me greatly. In a country where we have world-leading drinking water, it's very important that people have confidence in what comes out of the tap. We produce something like 15 billion litres of water per day. That is twice the volume of the entire bottled supply to the UK for the year. we can't manage without it. If you lose people's confidence in drinking water, the infrastructure or the belief of people in the infrastructure breaks down. Now, it only takes one incident like the South East to create a loss of trust, people to stash away bottled water in their cupboard. We need to really drive the industry into a place where this doesn't happen.
And the figures that Mike gave us would suggest that actually we're getting down that road now, at least in the South East water area.
We are.
If that's the extent to which people are wanting to safeguard themselves.
That's right, and the problem is, if you lose, when people lose trust, it's really hard to regain. Any salesman in any industry who's trying to sell a product and has a customer, as soon as you've lost that customer, the likelihood of them going back to buying your product is quite small. We don't have a competition in
There's no competition in water.
We
don't have
water.
two pipes going into our house.
What comes out of your tap is what you should drink. So you must spend even more effort to ensure that people have confidence. So I'm completely with Mike on his assertion here.
So looking at the industry regulation as a whole, we've got some changes coming on now, customer-focused licence conditions and the rest of it. Is that going to shift the dial in this, or do we need to be doing more?
We certainly hope so, yes. Just to reflect on the earlier question as well, the events at Tunbridge Wells post-date our investigation into historical lack of resilience of water supply, but they are entirely consistent with it. It's the same overall issue, and that's reflected in the severity of the fine, which is right towards the top end of what, under our rules, we're able to fine a company. South East Water had been a poor performer on water supply interruptions for quite a long time, which is why through that pyramid of interventions that I described earlier, we opened our investigation. Other companies that have had poor performances on water supply interruptions have managed to turn that around by working constructively with us, Severn Trent Water and Affinity Water, for example, and that's what we need South East Water to do. On the specifics of the customer-focused licence condition, that was only introduced in 2024. What we heard from customers and others at the time of the interruptions, plus Marcus's report, plus Mike's research, plus my own conversations with residents and businesses in Tunbridge Wells, is entirely consistent with the severity of that, which is why we opened our first investigation.
You've got that investigation ongoing into the
yes, we have. So
appropriateness as a licence.
I don't want to sound evasive, but because it's ongoing, there's only a very limited amount I can say about how it's progressing.
Sorry, I missed the last bit there.
There's only a very limited amount I can say about it because it is
ongoing. Of course. Would you be able to give us an indication of a timescale?
Our ambition is to finish it in this calendar year. That said, it depends on how constructively South East Water want to engage with us and the consistency of the evidence that we uncover and our analysis of that evidence.
Okay. Now, the CMA had their redeterminations. They took away some penalties for under-delivery and they gave South East Water less ambitious supply interruption targets. I'm sorry I'm laughing. I'm still visited by the idea of South East Water being a good company with an interruptions problem. You were opposed to that. Does that suggest that maybe there are deficiencies in the price review process that we would need to, if you can be overruled in that way?
Well, the white paper, the government's white paper, does propose a different system for review of final determinations to replace the full redetermination that we have at the moment, something that looks more like the judicial review standard that we see in other economic regulators, and when we have supported that.
Mm-hmm. Now, Ofwat have introduced restrictions on bonuses and a fitness and propriety rule for senior leaders. What impact will these reforms have on South East Water, do you think?
In terms of the prohibition on performance-related pay, that is triggered in financial years, so the decision and enforcement order and fine that we consulted on, with the consultation ending yesterday, is in one financial year. If that goes on to be the final decision, then that is the sort of thing under the bonus ban rule that would trigger the bonus ban.
This is possibly an unfair question, but let me ask it anyway. Is this how water companies are supposed to function? You know, you've got executive failure clearly. It seems to me you've then got non-executive failure also. How, at what point do you move from the governance controls to the regulatory controls?
So for any organisation, who its senior executives and non-executives are is a matter for that company's board. As an economic regulator, up to this point, our focus has been on the company itself, holding it to account, overseeing it and supporting it to deliver improvements. But as you point out, we have new powers under the Water Special Measures Act, some of which became active in 2025, some of which become active this month, some of which will become active next year, that have more of a focus on senior executives than in the past. So I think as we move towards the creation of a new integrated water regulator for England and a separate regulator for Wales, my view is that economic regulation will probably have more of a focus on executive directors than it has had in the past.
And do you think that actually having a integrated regulator is going to make it easier to tackle companies that behave like South East Water?
Yes, I do. We
What's the difference going to be? Because I think actually in this respect, at least the regulators have all taken a fairly strong line, but it doesn't seem to make much difference to them.
Well, the issue is broader than just water supply resilience for South East Water. There are gaps and inconsistencies and overlaps in our relevant responsibilities that need to be ironed out. We need to approach, in particular, planning for water and wastewater investment at a catchment basis in a much more integrated way. And the proposals in the white paper should enable that. That process will be followed in due course by a couple of more stages of transition plan and then legislation.
Right. Colleagues, have anything else you want to raise? Have you got any further observations that you feel you want to make in relation to the evidence that you heard?
Well, certainly from the evidence from South East Water, I'd be quite keen to see whether they actually deliver. Certainly from our experiences, the gap between cause, effect, recognition and delivery seems to be quite wide. So, for instance, in our alternative supplies, the company did an exercise on low service reservoir levels. Their own report said that they should have had a more timely approach. We, when we went to audit, noted that they hadn't taken notice of their own report, which recommended that they should have a more timely report, and then we've recommended against that. So what I'm quite keen is that we have spent, and my team, whom I'm grateful to for producing such an extensive, detailed report to evidence what was said, are not in the position where they have to keep pursuing the company to meet the expectations of us, the regulator, to make sure that the water supply is fit for future generations, whether it is the occurrence every winter or climate change.
Yeah. Mike,
I mean, there was just three numbers and a point, if you let me. You asked the witnesses earlier for a number to score. We've got a number. 74% of customers were dissatisfied by how this event was handled. There's a number from a statistically significant sample. It's not that we asked the wrong people. This is what people felt, right? Second number. So that was 47% of people who were on the priority service registers felt they did not get the support that they expected. That is not good enough. And 43% of people who weren't on the PSR but went to bottled water stations believed they did not get enough water to meet their needs. And that's something that Marcus, his team, talks about in their report, because there is an obligation to provide 10 litres per person per day for these types of events. So 3 numbers that I think help frame how people felt there. And all those numbers paint a very bleak picture. And we need to be better at this, responding to incidents, because we know that it will get tougher with climate change. But the final point is a cultural point, because a lot of these issues we hear, we didn't get enough money for resilience or whatever. But you look at this, culture is a big issue here. Is customer experience top of mind within the company? Was challenge done in the right way? Was the escalation done properly? Are people willing to front up and explain to their customers? All those points are cultural. This isn't about multi-million-pound investment programmes. Of course, that's part of the mix. But the cultural aspects are really important, because a lot of the cultural aspects directly affect the customer experience. And I think there needs to be a lot more focus on culture and ask that question. Who are the customers for the water company? Because I think it was Professor Dieter Helm who said, actually, the customers of the water company are the regulators, not the actual customers. That needs to change.
Yeah, absolutely. We've preached the sermon on culture many, many times in this committee. You've maybe noticed. Chris, do you have anything to add? Or
no, other than if what we have heard today marks South East Water stepping up, taking responsibility, getting a grip, and improving things for its customers, that is to be welcomed. But to repeat what I said earlier, only time will tell.
Time will tell, indeed. Well, time will not only tell, but it's run out. So we're very grateful to you and to all your staff for the hard work that they have done in the public interest in bringing very thorough analysis of something which has a very real day-to-day impact on the lives of many of our constituents. So we're very grateful to you for that. As I say, I fear we're maybe not at the end of the story yet. We shall see. But for the moment, we'll conclude today's proceedings. Order, order.